Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere grimy. No sugarcoating it. We're going to walk through one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in American history. 5 Points, New York City, mid-1800s. This isn't a place you survive by playing nice. You survive by being meaner than the next guy. By knowing which alleys are death traps, and who runs the block you're standing on. If you make eye contact too long, you might just disappear. And yeah, you probably won't survive this. But hey, that's half the fun. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure. Also let me know in the comments, what city are you in? And what time is it right now? I want to see how far this travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1842. You're standing at the edge of the Bowery, staring into the narrow mud-slick streets of 5 Points. To your left, Mulberry, to your right, Baxter. Ahead of you, a claustrophobic tangle of wooden buildings stacked like drunken Lego bricks. Some lean precariously toward each other, barely standing. They look like they're whispering secrets no one wants to hear. The smell hits you first. It's a cocktail of rotting vegetables, human waste, cheap gin, and something else, something sweet and wrong. That last scent? That might be the decay of something, or someone under a floorboard. But no one's checking. You step forward, boots sinking slightly into a mix of mud, ash and garbage. Every puddle has an oil-slick sheen. Kids dart past you barefoot, shouting in a mix of English, Irish brogue, and pure chaos. A woman yells from an upper window, dumping what you really hope is just dishwater into the street below. You dodge it. Welcome to 5 Points. This place earned its name from the five-pointed intersection where Anthony, Orange, Cross, Little Water and Mulberry streets collided. But its reputation wasn't about geography. It was about danger. You're now officially in the belly of the beast. By some estimates, this single neighborhood housed over 30,000 people crammed into a handful of crumbling tenements. Some rooms had 20 people sleeping in them. No beds, just straw filth, and whatever dreams survived the night. The slums were the result of rapid urban growth, a flood of immigration, and a total lack of urban planning. The Collect Pond, once a fresh water source, was filled in during the early 1800s, but the landfill was unstable and waterlogged, so everything built on top of it sagged and stank. By the time you're walking through, it's a rotting swamp covered in a thin crust of civilization. There's a creaking sound above you, and for a second, you think the building to your left might collapse, but no. It's just a neighbour building a new addition, out of scrap wood on the 3rd story with no nails. Nothing here is built to last, not even the people. You turn a corner and suddenly find yourself in the middle of a street performance. Not the kind with juggling or music. This one involves 2 boys, maybe 11 years old, fighting bare-knuckled for a crowd of jeering drunks. Money changes hands as one boy lands a punch, splitting the other's lip. No one steps in, a tooth hits the cobblestones. The winner gets a coin and a bottle. The loser gets spat on and a black eye. Entertainment 5 Point style. Here's a historical fact for you. Charles Dickens visited this very neighbourhood during his 1842 tour of America. He described 5 Points as a world of vice and misery. He said the place teemed with every kind of abomination. And Dickens liked weird stuff. So if it turned his stomach, you know it was bad. And here's something a little more fringe. Some early photographers, yes, cameras existed by then, paid local kids to stand still in these neighbourhoods so they could capture the slums without motion blur. That's right, some of those grim-faced kids in old black and white photos were actually paid actors of misery. Meanwhile, the real danger was happening just off-frame. As you walk deeper into the neighbourhood, you start noticing signs carved into doors and painted on walls. Some are crude drawings of rabbits or knives. Others show stars, flags or initials. These are gang marks, territorial tags that tell you who runs this street, who you owe tribute to if you set up shop, and who will slit your throat if you cross them. Now, scholars still debate the origin of 5 Points gang culture. Some argue it was driven by ethnic tension, Irish Catholics versus native-born Protestants. Others say it was purely economic. The gangs formed not out of hatred, but out of hunger. Still others believe it was just inevitable. Put too many desperate people in too small a space and the strongest will organise the weakest. A girl bumps into you, maybe 7 years old, barefoot, with a ratty shawl and sharp eyes. She mutters something in Irish and vanishes. Moments later, you realise your pocket is lighter. Your coin purse is gone. You just got picked by a child. A drunk stumbles out of a nearby bar, more of a wooden shed with a whiskey barrel than a proper saloon. He yells something about the rabbit boys and pulls out a knife. No one reacts. You sidestep him and keep walking. He either finds trouble or becomes a body in the gutter. Either way, you're not sticking around. Up ahead, a church bell tolls. It's not Sunday, and this bell isn't ringing for prayer. It's ringing because someone's dead. Again. Probably another gang killing, or maybe just an argument over a spilled drink. Here, arguments end with blood more often than not. You're starting to realise something about 5 Points. It's not just a slum, it's an ecosystem. The gangs are the predators, the kids are the scavengers. The police are more like weather patterns, unpredictable and usually making things worse. It's getting darker now, lamps flicker in windows, casting warped silhouettes on the street. Somewhere a violin plays. Not well, but earnestly. That's the thing, life does go on here. People fall in love, raise children, bake bread and laugh. But it all happens in the shadow of knives, poverty, and the ever-present stink of collapse. You reach a corner where 3 boys sit on an overturned cart. They eye you, but say nothing. One sharpens a stick with a broken bottle. The others pass a cigarette. Behind them is a wall of graffiti and symbols, layered like tree rings telling the story of years of turf wars, victories, and brutal defeats. You're not safe, not here, not ever, but you can't leave just yet. There's more to see, more to learn. And more gangs coming your way. The longer you walk through these slums, the more you start to notice the architecture. Not the kind you see on postcards, but the kind that tells you everything about how people live. Every building here looks exhausted. You pass a 3-story tenement with warped wooden siding, streaked dark from decades of smoke, soot and rain. The windows are open, but not because of the weather. There's no glass, just holes stuffed with rags and paper. You hear coughing from inside, followed by a baby's cry and a man's low growl, telling someone to shut up. It's not even nightfall, yet, and already the buildings are groaning. You step into an alley so narrow you can touch both walls with outstretched hands. Here, the bricks are slick with moss, and the ground is more slop than soil. A single cat darts past you. But it's not the kind you'd want to pet. Half its fur is missing, and its eyes look like they've seen things even you couldn't stomach. The rot is everywhere. And yet people live here. They eat, sleep, argue and love in spaces smaller than modern closets. You peek inside a doorway. No door, just a curtain made from a sack, and see a whole family around a broken table. The father is hammering something with a stone. The mother is scraping the inside of a tin can with a spoon. 2 kids are asleep on the floor, one using a sack of potatoes as a pillow. The room has 1 candle, and the flame flickers nervously, as if it's afraid of the dark too. This is the part of 5 Points people don't romanticize. It's not the street fights or the wild gang names, it's the slow decay, the daily erosion of dignity. Slum life in the 1800s wasn't just dangerous, it was dehumanizing. One fun fact, the wood used to build most of these tenements was untreated pine, prone to rot and highly flammable. Combine that with crowded rooms, candles for light, and coal stoves for heat, and you've got the recipe for constant fires. In fact, some buildings here burned down 3 or 4 times and were rebuilt just as badly each time. It's like watching someone reassemble a house of cards after every gust of wind and being shocked when it collapses again. You come across one of the yards, what landlords call the tiny patches of space between tenement buildings. In theory, it's a communal area. In practice, it's a shared toilet and trash pile. There are 2 outhouses and a mound of steaming refuse in the corner. The smell is thick, like something physical, wrapping around your head and squeezing. A man squats behind a barrel, clearly too tired to make it to the outhouse. No one looks twice. You try not to either. Overhead, laundry lines stretch like spiderwebs from building to building. Shirts, long johns, sheets, and rags wave like surrender flags. A woman leans out of a window hanging socks with one hand and holding a baby on her hip with the other. Her face is hollow, but her eyes are sharp. Everyone here learns to multitask in survival. Now here's a weird little fringe fact. There were entire cellar communities in these slums. Whole families lived underground, beneath the buildings, in basements so damp and airless that mushrooms grew on the walls. One 1850s account described children in these cellars with skin so pale they looked blue from lack of sunlight. Imagine growing up in a place where the sky is just something you hear about from someone else. You step back into the street just in time to see a cart pass by. It's pulled by a thin horse, ribs showing, and driven by a teenage boy who probably hasn't bathed since the last snow melted. The cart's full of barrels, but you don't want to know what's inside. Behind him, barefoot kids trail like ducklings, hoping he drops something, anything edible. There's shouting up ahead. You round the corner and see a crowd forming. Another fight. You hang back, letting your shadow fall against the wall instead of the ground. You've learned fast, stay still, stay silent, don't make eye contact. In the centre, two women are going at it, fists flying, hair yanked, curses screamed in English and Irish. One wears a bright red shawl that's slipping off her shoulders, revealing tattoos along her collarbone, prison marks likely. The other is barefoot and bleeding from the lip. The crowd cheers like it's a sporting event. Coins are thrown. A man offers a bottle of gin to the winner. No one breaks it up. Eventually one collapses, and the other spits on her, grabs the bottle, and disappears into the crowd. Violence here is currency. It's language. It's how respect is earned and territory is kept. You fight to survive, and if you can't fight, you disappear. It's that simple. Scholars still argue about whether slum life created gang culture or just attracted it. Was it the lack of opportunity that turned kids into criminals, or the presence of crime that made honest work seem pointless? Chicken and egg. All we know for sure is, once you've seen enough of these fights, you stop asking why and just ask how bad. You pass a grocer, if you can call him that. He's got a table with bruised fruit and stale bread. Flies swarm around the goods. He glares at you, daring you to comment. You nod respectfully and keep walking. He's probably paid his protection fee to the local gang, and if not, someone's coming tonight with a club to remind him. Over your shoulder you hear a familiar sound, the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps on a wooden walkway. You glance back. Two men dressed in dark coats, wide hats pulled low. Bowery boys? Maybe. Or maybe just thieves. Either way, they're watching you too closely. Time to move. You duck into another alley, this one quieter, shadowed. There's something rhythmic in the distance, the clink of hammers on metal. Someone's working. You come to a small courtyard where a blacksmith has set up shop, the heat from his forge making the air shimmer. His apprentice, a boy no older than 12, turns a crank while the smith shapes a horseshoe. It's oddly peaceful. Dangerous, sure, but peaceful. And just like that, you're reminded. People here do work. Not everyone is a thug or a thief, but even the honest ones are tangled in the same web of poverty, corruption and fear. It's like trying to keep your hands clean while swimming in sewage. A bell chimes somewhere. Probably from the 5 Points mission, a place run by do-gooders trying to save souls and offer hot meals. You'll pass by there soon enough. For now, you head east, deeper into the maze. The buildings are getting worse, the streets are narrowing, the rot is louder here. You're starting to feel it. The weight of the slums. The way every breath tastes like someone else's sickness. The way every doorway might lead to warmth or murder. And still, you walk. Because if you're going to understand this world, you need to see it all. Rot, ruin, and razor-blade teal. You don't hear them first, you feel them. The ground seems to shift slightly beneath your boots, and then there's the faint sound of boots in unison, slamming against the wood and stone of the street like a war drum. Then, over the rise at the far end of the alley, they appear. Strutting with slicked hair and cocky grins, wide-brimmed stovepipe hats tilted at a perfect angle, swaggering like kings in a broken kingdom. The Bowery boys. They look like something out of a bad stage play. Too clean for this part of town, too proud, too deliberate. You spot the signature red shirts beneath their vests, the kind worn by volunteer firefighters. Because yes, they were that too, sort of. Half firemen, half gangsters, all show and all teeth when they smile. They move in a pack, maybe 6 or 7 of them tonight, laughing, spitting, lighting cigars and scanning the street for trouble. Or for someone to make into trouble. The Bowery boys weren't just muscle. They had style, or at least their own version of it. Think loud vests, polished shoes, and pants tighter than a moralist's corset. They dressed like they had money even when they didn't. Especially when they didn't. And they had rules, sort of. You could call them a gang with principles. They hated crime, except when they were doing it. They were nativists, proud American-born Protestants who hated the Irish Catholic immigrants flooding into the city. And by hate, I mean full-scale street wars, bricks through windows, clubs over skulls, and riots that left entire neighbourhoods smouldering. The Bowery boys saw themselves as guardians of the city, defenders of law and order if law and order happened to involve breaking a few bones, Their clubhouse, nicknamed the Atlantic Garden, wasn't just a meeting spot. It was a political headquarters, a bar, and a recruitment centre for chaos. They didn't just rule the streets, they performed on them. You try to look invisible, hugging the shadows as they pass. One of them glances your way, gives a lopsided grin, and keeps walking. Maybe you're lucky. Maybe you don't look Irish enough to pick on, or maybe you'll see them again, and next time they won't be in such a good mood. Historically, the Bowery Boys were among the earliest organised street gangs in America. They weren't just brawlers, they had political muscle. They were allied with the anti-immigrant Know-Nothing movement, a group so paranoid and xenophobic they might make your most racist uncle look shy. For these guys, hating immigrants wasn't just a hobby, it was a calling. Their enemies, practically everyone, but especially the Dead Rabbits, an Irish gang from just a few blocks over. While the Bowery Boys saw themselves as clean-cut patriots, the Dead Rabbits were the flip side of the coin, grimy, furious, and Catholic. We'll get to them soon. For now, you just watch as the Bowery Boys disappear around a corner, voices echoing behind them like a warning bell. Here's a strange little side note, fringe, but true. Some of the Bowery Boys were actors by day, literally. They worked in theatres, performed comedic skits, and then rolled up their sleeves to brawl in the streets at night. So yes, there's a good chance someone who was tossing a man through a window on Tuesday night was reciting Shakespeare for ladies in frilly bonnets on Wednesday. And audiences loved them for it. Back to the street. You pass a barber shop with broken windows and a painted sign dangling by one hinge. Inside, a man sits strapped to a chair, not because he's getting a close shave, but because he's bleeding from the forehead and someone is stitching him up with what looks like a shoelace. A few others stand around smoking, watching. This isn't a barber. It's a gang hangout pretending to be a business. And those are Bowery Boys colours on the wall. You keep walking, ducking past a puddle that reflects the warped image of a nearby building. 3 stories tall, crooked, with a chimney that leans like it's drunk. A kid leans out the top window and hurls something at the street. You don't look up. That's a rookie move. If it hits you, you keep walking. You hear a commotion behind you. 2 Bowery Boys chasing someone. A blur in a torn coat ducking down an alley. They're shouting, but you can't make out the words. You pause at the corner, watch as the gang members vanish into the dark, laughter and rage blending into one sharp note of mayhem. Now here's the open debate. Were the Bowery Boys truly a gang, or were they a proto-political militia? Some historians argue they were more like a volunteer police force with a bias problem and a taste for violence. Others say, nope, they were criminals with good hair and slogans. The truth probably lies somewhere in the alley between. The Bowery, their namesake, wasn't always so rough. It had been a respectable area once, full of theatres, beer gardens and working-class housing. But by the mid-1800s, the Bowery Boys had turned it into their turf. It was the cleanest dirty part of the city, if that makes sense. A place where brawls broke out in front of opera houses and politicians met gang leaders for drinks. You wander further up the block, and sure enough, you come across one of those famed beer halls. This one's called the Liberty Shade. A wide building with the gas lamps glowing behind soot-covered glass. Inside, the floor is sticky, the piano's out of tune, and the bartender doesn't blink when someone throws a chair. That's how you know it's Bowery run. On the wall, there's a portrait of George Washington, which feels a bit ironic considering how many laws get broken in this building. But that's part of their brand. The Bowery Boys wrapped themselves in patriotism like a bulletproof vest. They talked about liberty while cracking skulls. They loved America, just not all the Americans in it. You watch a man stand on a table and start reciting something from memory. It's a poem, sort of. A violent, drunken ode to the city. The crowd hoots and throws coins. Someone starts a slow clap. Then someone else throws a punch and it all goes to hell again. You back out before the tables start flying. Back on the street it's quieter now. The gang's gone off to wherever gangs go when they get bored of street theatre. You're left in the soft amber light of a gas lamp. The glow turning the grime of the buildings a kind of eerie gold. For a second, it's almost beautiful. But that's how this place works. 5 Point seduces you. 1 minute, you're watching a brutal gang stomp a man in the street. The next, you're seeing candlelight flicker through a cracked window and hearing a lullaby in a language you don't know. The Bowery Boys were just the beginning. This is the stage, and more players are waiting in the wings. Meaner ones, messier ones. And if you thought stovepipe hats and red shirts were intimidating, wait until you meet the Dead Rabbits. You feel it before you see them, the change in energy. The street thickens with a kind of tension, the way the air feels before a storm rolls in. You're moving deeper now, away from the Bowery Boys' turf, into a territory painted not with red shirts and top hats, but with desperation, grief and Irish rage. This is where the dead rabbits live, or more accurately, where they survive. The buildings seem lower here, like they've crouched into themselves out of fear or shame. The wood is darker, blistered by decades of smoke. You pass a doorway with strange symbols scratched into it. At first, it looks like graffiti, but then you realise it's a warning. A jagged R carved above the lintel, surrounded by rough rabbit shapes and what might be tally marks. Someone's keeping score. Then you spot the first one, a kid, no older than 13, leaning against a doorway. His jacket's too big, patched in 3 different places. He doesn't look at you, he just watches your hands, measuring whether you're a threat or a target. You give a slight nod. He spits sideways but lets you pass. You round the next corner and suddenly there they are. 4 or 5 men in their 20s, seated on a crumbling stoop, smoking, drinking and muttering to each other in thick, accented English. Their coats are long and threadbare, but the knives tucked into their belts are well maintained. One of them has a red sash tied around his arm. Another has what looks like a dead rabbit's paw hanging from his neck on a piece of string. A charm or a promise. The Dead Rabbits were one of the most feared Irish gangs in the city during the mid-1800s, and their name wasn't cute. It was a threat. According to one legend, the name came from an early fight in which a dead rabbit was thrown into a street meeting as a message. We'll be back. And it won't be with just this. The rabbit wasn't just a symbol. It was a signal. They were born out of something rawer than the Bowery Boys' polished rage. These were immigrants, or children of immigrants, crowded into disease-ridden rooms, hated by the city, denied jobs, and hunted by real Americans. The Dead Rabbits weren't about fashion or flair. They were about payback. As you walk past them, one of the men grins and says something in Irish. You catch the word gobdow, not a compliment. You keep walking. These men are part of a gang that's less concerned with appearances and more interested in territory, numbers and fear. They fight with clubs, bricks, knives and fists, guns if they can afford them. Most can't, but a good brick will do, a rusted blade, a boot heel, whatever gets the job done. Historically, the Dead Rabbits aligned with Tammany Hall, the political machine that ran New York City with a cocktail of bribes, ballots and broken bones. The Rabbits acted as muscle during elections, stuffing ballot boxes and persuading voters to make the right choice. In return, Tammany protected them from the law and threw a few coins their way. It was a dirty handshake. But in 5 points, a dirty handshake was better than an honest starvation. You pass a bar, if you can call it that. It's a shack with no name, no windows, and only one lantern burning outside. A group of men cluster around the door, passing a bottle. Inside, you can hear a fiddle playing something fast and mean. Someone laughs, then shouts, then silence. You don't go in. Want something fringe? The Dead Rabbits had their own funeral crews. That's right. If a gang member died, especially in a turf war, they'd throw a parade. A real one. Carts draped in black, mourners in rags, whiskey passed down the line, and sometimes a brawl right at the gravesite. Mourning wasn't passive. It was aggressive, loud, and always public. You didn't just grieve a rabbit, you made the city remember him. The scholars still debate whether the Dead Rabbits were more of a social club or a street militia. Some argue that, unlike the Bowery Boys, they were more concerned with protecting their people than with gaining power. Others point to their long list of crimes, murder, extortion, robbery, and say, no, these were criminals, plain and simple. But walk these streets long enough and you'll see. It doesn't matter what label you give them, they were born from survival, not ideology. You head deeper into the alleyways now, where the streets seem to buckle inward. A woman with wild hair and a baby on her hip glares at you from behind a curtain. A group of boys are digging through a pile of coal ash with sticks, looking for anything that might burn. One of them holds up a dead rat like he's found gold. He has. In one narrow passage you see a wall lined with candles, makeshift shrines. You count at least a dozen, each one for someone lost. Names scratched into wood, pieces of cloth tied to nails, a child's boot, a rusted locket. The dead aren't buried here. They're remembered in corners. You stop for a moment and breathe in the air. It's heavy, thick with smoke, old sweat and wet garbage. The rabbits move through it like ghosts with grudges. You can feel their presence in every alley, every stair. They don't need uniforms or flashy names. The smell of blood and damp brick is enough. Down another side street you hear a commotion. You follow it, carefully, and peek around the edge of a crumbling wall. It's a fight. No, a beating. A man on the ground, 2 dead rabbits kicking him in turns. He's groaning, but not fighting back. One of the rabbits yells something about the Bowery. Ah, a message then. You stay hidden until they're done. When they leave, the man on the ground doesn't move. You think about stepping close, helping. Then you remember where you are. You move on. One of the stranger truths about the dead rabbits. They didn't see themselves as villains, not even close. They were avengers, protectors of a people no one else wanted to protect. When the Irish came to New York in waves after the Great Famine, they were met with contempt. No Irish need apply. Signs hung in shop windows. The police treated them like vermin. The Bowery boys treated them worse. So the dead rabbits did what desperate people do. They fought back. A bell rings again, faint but urgent. It's not from a church this time. It's a signal. Somewhere a fight is brewing. You hear distant footsteps, the soft patter of many boots moving quickly. The rabbits are gathering. And this is only the tip of it. You're in the heart of their world now. A world built on poverty, rage, and a promise. If the city doesn't want us, we'll take it by force. You feel that promise in the wind as you duck into the shadows again. You've seen the Bowery boys. Now you've met the dead rabbits. The sides are forming, and when they clash, the city will burn. You duck into a doorway to let a fight pass. Not one of those full-scale brawls that fills the street with blood and screams, just a minor one. 2 boys, maybe 15, maybe younger, throwing fists outside a butcher's stall while a small crowd watches with the bored interest of people who've seen far worse. One of the boys is bleeding from the nose, the other from the knuckles. The butcher leans against his doorframe, chewing on something and yelling half-hearted encouragement. There's no effort to stop it. No one steps in. You don't either. Because here in 5 Points, fighting isn't just violence. It's language. It's how you learn who you are and how far you can be pushed. You don't start life in 5 Points with a name, you earn it, usually by how well you throw a punch or how long you can go without crying when someone smashes your face into a wall. And that's the thing people don't get about the gangs in this place. They didn't always start as gangs. They started as survival units. Kids banding together because no one else would protect them. Families too poor to feed each child would send them to the streets instead. If you were lucky, you'd fall in with a group. If you were unlucky, you disappeared. You keep walking, watching the people around you move in this strange ballet of hunger and hustle. A teenage girl with scabbed knees and a black eye hawks newspapers at the corner, her voice cracked from shouting over the noise. A boy no older than 8 runs past you, snatches a roll from a vendor's cart and vanishes into the smoke before anyone reacts. The vendor doesn't even shout, he just sighs and goes back to rearranging bread that's already half mould. This city creates criminals the way rain creates puddles, not because it wants to, but because it doesn't know how not to. You duck into another alley and find a group of boys sitting in a half circle around a candle jammed into a whiskey bottle. They're playing dice, tossing them with practiced flicks of the wrist. One has a fresh bruise blooming across his cheek. Another wears a coat 3 sizes too big, likely stolen. They glance at you but don't pause. You're not a threat. Not yet. But you're not family either. Not in this tight little unit. Here's your historical tidbit. By the 1850s, there were dozens of youth gangs in New York City. Some had names like the Swamp Angels, the Wyos, or the 40 Thieves. They weren't cute street clubs. They ran pickpocketing rings, smuggling networks and robbery crews. One gang, the Short Tails, were known for committing crimes while wearing short-cropped coats to show off they had nothing to hide. Bold, stupid, and terrifyingly efficient. One fringe fact, some of these child gangs were hired out by adults. Need someone to crawl into a narrow window and open a door from the inside? A kid could do it. Want to smuggle goods under the cops' noses? A child looked harmless enough. And if they got caught, well, they were underage. Slap on the wrist. Maybe a stint at a reform school if you were lucky. If not, straight to Blackwell's Island, where even rats tried to escape. You pass what looks like a schoolhouse, but it's boarded up. A few chalk drawings still linger on the brick, stick figures, lopsided suns, crude initials. There was a time this place might have tried to teach letters and numbers, but now it teaches survival, and the first lesson, trust no one, especially not someone bigger than you and smiling. You turn a corner and see a child sleeping in a doorway, arms wrapped around a dog with one ear. The dog stares at you with more awareness than the boy. It growls low, protective. You nod. Smart dog. But you have to ask yourself, what happens to a kid raised in this chaos? How do you become an adult when your only skills are lying, stealing and hurting? That's the thing. Most of them didn't. The lifespan of a 5 Points kid wasn't long. Disease, knife, starvation or worse. Those that survived. They either went legit, joined the docks or the army, or they rose in the gang ranks and learned how to run a racket. That brings us to an open debate among historians. Did these gangs form because of the community, or did they form in spite of it? Some argue that immigrant neighbourhoods like 5 Points created tight social bonds, shared languages, churches, traditions. But those same scholars admit that those bonds couldn't stop hunger, or protect kids from the streets. Others believe the community failed its children entirely, that poverty drowned any chance of structure, and gangs became the only stable family left. As you pass through another crowded courtyard, really just a space between two buildings with a broken fence and a single water pump, you see a scene that feels quiet. Too quiet. A dozen kids gathered around an older boy who's telling a story. He's got a stick in his hand, using it to draw shapes in the dirt. A rough map, maybe, or a plan. The others nod as he speaks. You don't get close enough to hear it, but you recognise the energy. It's planning. They're organising something. A hit, a robbery. Could be anything, could be nothing. But it's something to do. Something that makes them feel powerful in a world that mostly just forgets they exist. One of them turns and sees you. Just a glance. You're not from here. Not really, and they know it. A few blocks away you hear glass shatter. Not unusual, but then there's a scream, high-pitched, young, you freeze. The kids don't. They don't even look up. They've heard it before. You move on. What else can you do? You're starting to see how it all connects, the adults. The kids, the gangs, the slums. It's not separate stories, it's one long scar running through the city. These children grow up watching their fathers die in bar fights or their mothers thrown out of brothels at dawn. They see the way the police treat them, like criminals before they even steal. And so they lean in. They become the thing the city fears most. And the city, it doesn't fight back. Not really. It just builds another tenement, hires another crooked cop and lets the system keep eating itself. You pass a brick wall covered in chalk graffiti. Names, dozens of them. Crossed out, circled, underlined. A strange sort of memorial. A kid sits beneath it with a slingshot aiming at the rats near a barrel fire. He hits one, cheers softly to himself. Another child born to survive. Another future dead rabbit. Or Bowery boy. Or nobody. You don't belong here. But for now, you're walking with them. And if you listen closely, you can hear the heartbeat of the slum pounding like a warning drum through the soles of your boots. You wake up the next morning with your back sore from the wall you slept against. Maybe you didn't sleep. Maybe you just closed your eyes and waited for the sun to rise, trying not to breathe too deeply, in case someone mistook you for a corpse and tossed you in the river. Either way, you're back on the streets, and the city's already boiling. By mid-morning, 5 Points is alive in the worst possible way. The streets are a mess of half-dressed children, peddlers shouting over one another, drunks staggering toward their first or fifth drink, and shopkeepers shoving filth out of doorways with cracked brooms. The smell is ambitious. Human waste of it, coal smoke, baking bread, rotting cabbage, blood, and something dead. Possibly a rat. Possibly not. A gang of teenagers rushes past you laughing. One holds a bottle, another's got blood on his shirt. You don't ask questions. Instead, you follow the flow of people toward a commotion on Worth Street. A crowd's forming around two men who've squared off in the road. Shirts off, boots planted, fists clenched. No weapons, at least not yet. Just fists and pride. The crowd circles around them like a hungry mouth. Someone yells, 10 cents on Seamus! Another shouts back, you'll be eating that dime, fool! And just like that, the fists start flying. Welcome to your average street brawl in 5 Points. Less about vendettas and more about routine. In a neighbourhood where everyone's broke and rage is cheap, there's always someone to fight. Irish, Protestant versus Catholic, neighbour versus neighbour, doesn't really matter. This isn't about territory, it's about relief. For 10 brutal minutes, people get to forget the mould climbing their walls and the rats chewing through their shoes. The two men throw wide, slow punches, more brawling than boxing. One stumbles backward into a food cart, knocks over a crate of turnips. The vendor curses, but doesn't intervene. He's watching too. Here's a historical slice for you. By the 1850s, Five Points had become infamous not just for its crime, but for these organised street fights. Sometimes they were spontaneous, but more often they were planned events. Word would spread. Rabbits versus Bowery boys, Tuesday at noon, and people would show up like it was the theatre. Vendors would sell drinks, bets would fly. Children would sit on rooftops with front row views of bloodshed. Sometimes the fights ended with a handshake. Other times they ended with a body dragged into an alley and left there overnight. One of the fringe facts, some fights were refereed by priests. Yes, priests. They'd try to make sure things didn't get too deadly, though their presence was often ignored once fists started flying. Nothing like a man of God holding up a cross while someone gets their teeth punched in. Back to the street, blood hits the cobblestones, and the smaller man goes down hard. The crowd erupts, cheers, groans, the sound of coins clinking as bets are paid. The winner raises a fist, spit and sweat dripping from his chin. Someone hands him a flask. Victory tastes like rock-gut whiskey and iron. But here's the thing, these aren't isolated outbursts. They're daily rituals. You walk 2 blocks over and there's another fight breaking out. This one's 2 women clawing at each other over a spilled sack of coal. One swings a broken bottle, the other pulls hair with the one hand and swings a baby on her hip with the other. Survival doesn't stop for childcare. You want to understand the gangs of New York. Then understand this. They were born in a place where violence was currency, and everyone was broke. You didn't need a reason to fight. You just needed to be angry and visible. You step out of the crowd and into a narrow street called Anthony Street. The gutters here run dark. Yesterday's rain mixed with today's filth. You dodge a dead cat and press on, stepping around shattered glass and a boot with no owner. A man passes you with a fresh black eye and a grin. He whistles as he limps. There's something proud in his expression, like he's earned something. Maybe he has. A fight in 5 Points was a form of identity. You got known, you got respected, you got feared. In a world where your landlord ignored your screams and the police were worse than the criminals, sometimes being feared was the only way to stay alive. Now for the scholars. Some argue these fights were less about chaos and more about community enforcement. In a place with no formal justice system, the streets made their own rules. Someone steals from your shop, you don't call the cops, you challenge them in public. You beat them bloody in front of their friends. That's justice. That's deterrence. Others claim it was more primal. A population under constant stress and erupting in the only way it knew how. Either way, no one was safe from a fist to the face. You keep moving. You see a woman washing blood out of a cloth in a bucket. Not her blood, she says it was her husband's. He got caught between 2 gangs last night, just walking home. Nothing personal, just wrong place, wrong time. She doesn't cry, she just scrubs harder. You pass a saloon with the windows boarded over. A line of people stands outside anyway. They know it'll open soon. The smell of old beer and despair is already leaking out. You peek inside and see the tables already covered in drying vomit, knife scratches and burn marks. This is where many fights start, and more than a few end. You pause near a wooden post plastered with old paper scraps, ads for missing people, sermons, even a poem. But right now, you're looking at a flyer announcing an upcoming boxing exhibition. It's in code, of course. It's a gang fight with fancy marketing. Admission, a bottle of gin or 10 cents, winner takes all, loser might not walk home. The sun's high now and the streets are buzzing with heat and rage. Everywhere you look, people are moving, yelling, shoving, living on the brink. Someone screams from an upstairs window. A bottle flies out and shatters beside you. No one apologises. There's something fascinating about how normalised it is. Fights aren't hidden or hushed. They're expected. People schedule their violence like appointments. There's even an unspoken code. You don't jump in unless invited. You don't interrupt. You don't cry foul. You just fight or watch or run. And once in a while you see the aftermath. You pass a stoop where 2 young boys are helping a third who has clearly been beaten. His lips split. His nose is crooked. But his friends are patching him up with wet rags and quiet voices. One hands him a crust of bread. No judgment. No pity. Just routine. That's the quiet truth under all the shouting and swinging fists. No one here is shocked anymore. Violence isn't a tragedy. It's just breakfast. You head toward the edge of the neighbourhood, where the smoke thins and the buildings get slightly less tilted. You think maybe you've seen enough for one day. But something tells you this is just the pre-show. The real fights are still coming. And the gangs? They're just getting started. You head north, back into the maze, trying to find somewhere marginally less explosive. But it's all just different shades of tension here. No part of 5 Points is calm, just quiet until it isn't. You're starting to understand that. Around every corner is a grudge, and under every stoop a deal being made with a handshake or a blade. You pass a street preacher shouting about fire and brimstone, ignored by everyone except a dog chewing on his pant leg. He keeps yelling anyway. That's what it's like here. People scream into the void and pretend someone's listening. But here's the truth hiding beneath the grime. Corruption doesn't just thrive here. It lives next door, upstairs, and sometimes wears a gold watch and a clean suit. You're about to meet one of the main reasons these gangs flourish, despite all the broken windows and broken bones. A little political machine called Tammany Hall. It sounds fancy, right? Like a marble lobby and chandeliers. But Tammany wasn't about luxury. It was about control. Think of it as the shadow government of New York in the mid-1800s. Officially, they were the Democratic Party's local power base. Unofficially, they were the ones who kept the wheels greased with bribes, booze, and backroom deals. And they had a special relationship with the gangs that ruled 5 Points. You stop in front of a building that looks like it could collapse in a stiff wind. The sign above the door reads Social Club, but no one's playing checkers inside. Men in well-tailored coats go in and out, shaking hands and speaking in low tones. One slips a pouch into another's vest. You're pretty sure that's not tobacco. This isn't a gang hideout. It's a Tammany clubhouse, one of many sprinkled throughout the city. See, Tammany didn't operate from some high tower. They embedded themselves right into the communities they exploited. Their strategy was simple. Give the poor just enough help to keep them loyal. A sack of coal in winter, a job sweeping streets, a bottle of whiskey before election day. In return, your vote, and maybe your silence when the wrong guy disappears. The gangs and Tammany worked in perfect sync. Take the dead rabbits. When election day came around, they'd be out in force, dragging immigrants to polling stations, coaching them on who to vote for. If that didn't work, they'd just beat the opposition voters unconscious and steal their ballots. Tammany got its votes, the rabbits got protection. If a rabbit got arrested, the right official made sure the charges went away. If a business refused to pay protection money, suddenly their liquor license vanished. Coincidence, please? It was a full ecosystem of greased palms and bloody knuckles, and it worked. Worked so well, in fact, that for decades Tammany Hall was untouchable. Here's your historical nugget. William Boss Tweed, one of Tammany's most notorious leaders, stole tens of millions from the city during his reign in the 1860s and 70s. But back in the 40s and 50s, when you're walking these streets, the groundwork is already there. You're seeing the skeleton of a machine that would one day grind the city like meat. Now, let's go a little fringe. There's long been rumour that certain Tammany officials kept favour books, ledgers of every bribe, every gift, every useful gang favour ever collected. If you were in that book, your life could be made or broken. You might get a city contract, or you might be pulled from the East River with a note pinned to your chest. The books were supposedly destroyed in a mysterious fire, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they're still locked in a basement somewhere, rotting quietly alongside a few secrets that could rewrite everything. You pass a man in a top hat and fine shoes, walking with a rabbit. Not just walking, laughing. They look like old friends, and maybe they are. Because in 5 Points, a slumlord and a street enforcer often shared more than turf. They shared interests, they shared enemies, and more often than not, they shared a bottle after a profitable day. But the corruption isn't just political, it's spiritual, it creeps into everything. You pass a church that's supposed to be a sanctuary. The doors are open, candles flickering inside. But there's a man leaning against the entryway, charging people to come in. Donation, he says. Suggested. You don't ask where the money goes. You spot a cop on the next block, leaning on a lamppost, chatting with two Bowery boys. He laughs at something one says, then takes a cigar from his pocket and offers it. They light up together. No badges shown, no questions asked. If anything goes down on this block tonight, you already know who won't be arrested. That's the other piece of this rotten puzzle. The cops were often no better than the criminals. Many were Irish themselves, or beholden to Tammany. Their loyalty wasn't to the law, but to whoever paid best. A gang member with connections could walk free, while an innocent man without friends might end up rotting in a cell for a crime no one bothered investigating. Historians still fight over the real reach of Tammany Hall. Some paint it as an evil empire. Others say it was a necessary evil, a corrupt but effective way to manage a broken, exploding city. But most agree on one thing: without Tammany, The gangs wouldn't have lasted, not like they did, not with that kind of confidence, because what's a gang without protection? Just a bunch of angry men with sticks. But give them political cover, give them a judge in your pocket, and a constable on your payroll, now you've got something durable, something dangerous gives, something that doesn't die when one or two guys take a bullet. You stop at a bar where a man in a suit and a man in bloodstained boots are arguing over whose boys control the docks tonight. It's tense. Voices rise, hands twitch near belts, but then someone produces a ledger, little black book, and it all calms down. They work it out. Everyone wins, or at least everyone at the top. The people at the bottom, they get another week of empty promises and leaky roofs. By the time you leave the bar, the sun is sinking again, and the streets are turning gold and grey. You hear a woman singing in the distance badly, a baby crying nearby, a fight starting somewhere behind you, again. This place, this whole neighbourhood, is not just broken, it's engineered to stay broken. And the worst part, it works. The city runs on this chaos. The gangs keep the slums in line, the slums keep the machine oiled, and the machine keeps smiling, taking its cut and feeding the next round of fresh faces into the furnace. You walk on, feeling the weight of 100 bribes in the air and 1,000 lies beneath your feet. And somewhere, up in a warm office with clean windows, a Tammany official raises a glass and toasts to a job well done. The deeper you go into 5 Points, the more you start to realise the gangs aren't just made up of grimy street thugs and brawling boys. There's another layer, a quieter one, watching from the shadows, and tonight that shadow belongs to the women. You probably didn't expect that. Most people don't. Gangs are supposed to be a man's world, right? Men with knives, men with grudges, men throwing fists until someone stops moving. But that's only part of the story. The truth is, while men fought in the open, women were the ones pulling strings, running side hustles, hiding weapons, and in some cases, killing just as efficiently. You pass a boarding house, one of many in the neighbourhood. The paint is peeling and there's a strange smell wafting from the stairwell, but this place is known. People whisper about it. A tall woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue runs it. Her name's Bridget, or maybe Maggie, or maybe she uses both depending on who's asking. She's not in a gang officially, but everyone knows she keeps a ledger of debts, deals, and who owes whom a favour. Some of the city's most dangerous men sleep under her roof, not because it's safe, but because they know she can keep a secret. Inside, women move through the halls with practiced efficiency. Some carry trays, others buckets, but none of them speak to you. They know you don't belong, and if you're not on the list, or worse, if you're on the wrong list, you won't make it out. Women in the slums work every angle. Laundry girls who overhear everything. Tavern maids who pass messages between gang leaders. Seamstresses who stitch contraband into coats. Midwives who patch up stab wounds in secret. Some of them are gang wives, sure, but a growing number aren't tied to any man. They're building their own kind of power. Here's your historical fact. One of the most notorious underworld figures in 19th century New York was Gallus Mag, a 6-foot-tall bouncer/brawler who worked the door at a dockside dive called the Hole in the Wall. She was known for biting off the ears of unruly patrons and keeping them in a jar behind the bar. No one messed with her, not even the gangs. Another lesser-known figure was a pickpocket known only as Sadie the Goat. Legend says she ran with river pirates and headbutted her victims like a ram. She supposedly led a crew of criminals who raided Hudson River estates. That's right, a woman running a pirate gang. And yes, it sounds like pulp fiction, but it's buried in police records and court transcripts all the same. Not every story is that extreme though. Some women ran informal networks, trading information, smuggling goods in their skirts, or stashing fugitives under beds. A woman who kept her mouth shut could earn the trust of multiple gangs. A woman who knew who was sleeping with whom, or who was planning to betray which leader, she could be more valuable than a dozen bruisers with clubs. You walk into a narrow alley and spot a row of clotheslines strung between two buildings. Dresses flutter in the breeze, and below them 2 girls no older than 16 are crouched beside a bucket, scrubbing blood out of a man's shirt. It's fresh. You don't ask. One looks up and smirks. "Ain't yours, is it?" she asks, gesturing at the stained fabric. You shake your head. "Didn't think so," she says, then goes back to scrubbing. They're not scared, not even cautious. That's the most unnerving part. These girls have seen worse, probably done worse. There's a rumour that some of the dead rabbits use women to scout enemy turf, flirt with rival gang members and lure them into dark rooms where sharp objects do the talking. And the women? They do it for money, for loyalty. sometimes just for the satisfaction. There's another type of woman in 5 Points, the ones in the brothels. Don't flinch, they are a part of the story too. You pass one of the more infamous ones, a narrow brownstone with dark curtains and a brass knocker shaped like a serpent. The women inside are painted and polished, but their eyes tell you they're watching everything. They see who comes and goes. They hear names whispered in lust, plans spoken in drunken confidence. A good madam could make a fortune selling secrets, and many did. Now here's the debate. Were these women victims of their environment or agents in their own survival? Some scholars argue they were exploited, forced into a life with no options. Others believe they carved out power in a system that left most women invisible. Either way, what's not debated is this. Women in 5 Points knew how to navigate danger, and more importantly how to use it. You pass by a street corner where a small group has gathered around a woman with a wooden box. She's selling what she calls herbal remedies. They're probably just whiskey, vinegar and wishful thinking, but people buy them anyway. A mother trades a coin and whispers something about her son having a fever. The woman nods and hands her a small bottle. You can't help but notice the scar on her neck and the brass knuckles tucked into her apron. She's not just a healer, she's protection. In the distance you hear shouting, not the usual kind. This is organised, rhythmic. A woman's voice rises over the crowd, leading a chant. You edge toward the noise and find a group of women protesting outside a bakery. Word is the owner raised prices again. These women have babies to feed, no money, and nothing left to lose. One throws a rock, then another. The windows shatter, and the baker locks the door from the inside. The women don't leave, they just stand there screaming into the cracked glass. The crowd gathers. Gangs don't step in, not yet, but they're watching. If the right spark hits, this could turn into a riot. And if it does, those women will be in the front line. You back away slowly, careful not to draw attention. Not because they'll hurt you, but because you're realising something. The gangs of New York weren't just fists and brass. They were eyes in windows, whispers in dark rooms, hands that stitched, scrubbed, smuggled and stirred. They say behind every great man is a woman, but in 5 Points, sometimes she's standing beside him with a knife, or waiting behind him with a plan, and if you underestimate her, you won't make that mistake twice. You start noticing the names before you notice the faces. Plug Uglies, Shirt Tails, Slaughterhouses, Chichesters. Some sound like jokes, others like diseases, but all of them are real. Real gangs, real dangerous, and in a city already teetering on the edge of collapse, they each carved out their own twisted little slice of infamy. You're standing on Bayard Street now, and someone scrawled a symbol on the wall in thick black soot. A plug hat with a crack through it. That's the calling card of the Plug Uglies, a gang so weirdly named you almost laugh until you hear how they fight. The name came from the huge stovepipe hats they wore, stuffed with padding, sometimes even lined with metal. Imagine a helmet, but fashionably ridiculous. These guys weren't elegant. They were street tanks, barreling through fights with those hats pulled low and clubs swinging high. Not subtle, not strategic, just blunt force trauma on legs. You watch two Plug Uglies walking ahead of you now, thick men with crooked noses and jawlines like brick walls. One of them carries a lead pipe like it's a cane, the other has a huge dent in his hat and doesn't seem to care. They laugh about something, probably someone they beat senseless yesterday, and turn into a bar with the door already swinging open, as if it's scared of them. What's odd about the Plug Uglies is that they were actually from Baltimore originally, but like a good rash, they spread. By the mid-1800s, they were showing up in New York during elections, hired muscle for rent, showing up in droves to brawl, intimidate, and, if necessary, start full-blown riots. They didn't care about politics, they cared about getting paid and breaking things. Now for a quirky detail, the Plug Uglies were known for travelling in makeshift wagons, which they called murder vans. These were wooden carts fitted with benches, barrels of ale, and sometimes clubs already handed out in advance. It was like a picnic. If your picnic involved blood, shattered teeth, and bribery. As you move deeper into 5 Points, the gang names get even weirder. You hear people whispering about the Shirt Tails, who were, quite literally, named because they wore their shirts untucked and hanging down. It was supposed to make them look wild, feral, uncontrollable, like they'd run out of their homes mid-fight. Most of them did. These guys were Irish-American scrappers, fast and brutal, often described as acting like wild dogs. They didn't have the political connections of the Dead Rabbits or the theatrical flair of the Bowery boys, but they had numbers, and they had desperation. You didn't start a fight with the Shirttails, you just hoped they were looking the other way when you walked past. You turn onto Baxter Street and there's a man asleep on a crate with Chichesters carved into the wood beside him. Another gang, smaller, less infamous, but still deadly. The Chichesters were known for operating in the dark, literally. They preferred to attack at night, slipping out of shadows, stabbing first, asking questions never. They were part gang, part ghost story. Mothers warned their children about them. There's a constant scholarly debate about these smaller gangs. Were they spin-offs of the big ones, like the Dead Rabbits? Or were they their own entities, born from block-by-block rivalries? Some researchers think they were basically neighbourhood militias, formed because there was no other protection. Others believe the names were fluid. Gang members switched sides depending on who had the better whiskey, or fewer rats in the clubhouse. Loyalty was flexible. Knives weren't. You find yourself near a fire station now. Well, it used to be a fire station. The words are still carved above the door, but inside it looks like a gang hangout now. Torn playing cards on the floor, blood spatters on the wall that someone tried to scrub off but gave up halfway. In the corner, a man sharpens a stick into a shiv, and nobody tells him not to. Here's the thing, some of these smaller gangs didn't start out as criminal groups. They started out as volunteer fire brigades, the kind that raced to burning buildings not to help people, but to fight other brigades for territory. Yes, really. The first one to hook their hose up got the credit and the cash, so they fought over it, with axes, with fists, with entire gangs backing them up. You walk a little faster now. In the slums, these names, Plug Uglies, Shirttails, Chichesters, aren't just scary, they're reputation currency. They show up in whispered warnings and drunken songs. Mothers warn their sons not to join them, but those same boys sneak off at night to follow them, hoping to get noticed. Being recruited by a gang is like being knighted in the filth of 5 points. You get a name, a crew, a fighting chance. You pass a wall covered in chalk drawings, a crude list of initials crossed out one by one. Maybe it's a list of enemies, maybe it's a record of who's still alive. Either way, it's gang business and not yours. Then there's the fringe theory, that many of these gang names started as in-jokes or insults. The Shirttails might have been mocked by rival gangs for being sloppy dressers, so they owned it. Same with the Plug Uglies, ugly might have started as an insult. But by the time they were breaking noses in election brawls, it was a badge of honour. In 5 points, weakness could become strength if you just yelled it loud enough. You duck into a side street and stumble upon a fight just finishing. A man lies on the ground, moaning, while 3 others walk away, hands bloodied. One laughs. That's what happens when you cross the tails. He says it casually, like he's talking about the weather. One of them is still fixing his suspenders. This is the rhythm of the slums. The big gangs get the attention, but the CEOs, so the smaller names, fill in the cracks, keeping the whole structure rotten and humming. They hold turf, run rackets, pick fights, and teach the next generation how to hate fast and punch hard. You pass a shoeshine boy with a split lip and a tattoo of a plug hat on his arm. He can't be more than 10. His customer, a man with scuffed boots and a missing ear, pays him with a coin and a pat on the shoulder. "You'll make a fine ugly someday," he says. The boy grins, teeth missing. And that's the thing that sticks with you. These names might sound cartoonish from the outside, but in here, in this nightmare city within a city, they are lifelines. They give people something to belong to, even if it's just a name scrawled on a bloody wall. You keep moving. There are more gangs to meet, more codes to decipher, and the deeper you go, the weirder and deadlier it's all becoming. By now you've figured out that 5 points isn't just about knives in the dark and alleyway brawls, it's about identity, and who gets to claim this patch of filth as their own. And if there's one thread woven through every gang story in these streets, it's nativist rage. The burning, frothing belief that only some people deserve to call this city home. That belief, like a parasite, attached itself to the gangs and fed on fear until it burst into the open as riot, fire, and war. You feel the temperature rise before anything else. The streets are tense again, and not just because it's hot. People move faster. Conversations are clipped. Eyes dart from doorways. Something is brewing. You hear 2 men arguing on the corner, one with an Irish brogue, the other with a New York twang sharp enough to cut glass. The words are barely words, just noise, heat, and hatred. The man with the twang wears a red shirt, tall hat, and the smug grin of a Bowery boy with a chip on his shoulder. The Irishman doesn't flinch, but you see his fists clench. This isn't personal, it's tribal. They don't know each other, but they know each other. Nativist versus immigrant. Protestant versus Catholic. Real American versus potato thief. You can almost taste the bile between them. This kind of tension didn't pop up overnight. It was simmering long before fists started flying. The flood of Irish immigrants fleeing famine brought hundreds of thousands into New York, mostly poor, mostly Catholic, and mostly desperate. To the nativists, gangs like the Bowery Boys and their supporters, they weren't just foreigners, they were infections. Here's your historical truth. Entire anti-immigrant political parties rose during this era, like the Know-Nothings, named because their members would claim to know nothing when asked about their secretive operations. They believed Catholicism was a threat to American democracy, that Irish immigrants were drunks and criminals, which, to be fair, in 5 Points wasn't entirely off base, and that the streets should belong to the native-born. They weren't just racists with opinions, they were violent mobs with political backing. You pass a burned-out building with the faint trace of lettering still visible on the brick. Irish need not apply. It's not a threat, it's a policy. Nativist employers refused to hire the Irish, churches barred them, schools treated their children like vermin. So what did they do? They formed their own networks. Gangs like the Dead Rabbits became more than thugs. They were defenders. For many Irish immigrants, the gang was the only institution that would take them in, protect them or avenge them when the law looked the other way. Tensions flared constantly, and not just in words. You see the ghost of one of those flares right now, on Bayard Street, where a small crowd is gathered around the site of a building that burned last week. People whisper it was set on purpose. Irish tenants, nativist gang, no one was charged, no one ever is. You hear the stories in hushed tones. Gangs dragging people from boarding houses in the middle of the night. Fires started with oil-soaked rags. Whole families beaten in the streets because their accents were too thick. Children taunted with slurs until they fought back and lost teeth for the effort. And then there were the riots. Full-blown, no-holds-barred, tear-the-city-apart kind of riots. The biggest one you keep hearing about, the one everyone spits when they mention, was the Dead Rabbits riot of 1857. Days of chaos. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, and other gangs clashed in the streets in one of the largest gang battles in New York history. Hundreds of fighters, dozens dead. The police tried to step in and were promptly beaten back, and here's the twisted part. Some police joined the fight. That's not hyperbole. New York at the time had two competing police forces thanks to a political feud, the Metropolitan Police and the Municipal Police, and they literally fought each other in the streets while gang members stabbed and clubbed each other around them. You think it's a mess now? Imagine a riot where the cops start punching each other first. There's an ongoing debate among historians about what these riots really meant. Were they spontaneous expressions of ethnic tension? Or were they manipulated by political machines like Tammany Hall to keep the poor angry and distracted? It's hard to say, but it's not hard to see how effective it was. Irish and native-born working-class men who might have found common ground instead tore each other apart while the city's elite watched from their brownstone balconies, sipping imported tea. You pass an alley where fresh chalk markings read "No Paddy Zone" in blocky shaking script. Someone's warning the Irish to stay out, or maybe they're inviting a fight. Either way, blood will follow. Further up the block, a group of Bowery Boys stands around a barrel fire in the middle of the day. One's reciting something that sounds like a speech, and boys, and let no papist dog pollute our streets with his lies and drunken filth. The others cheer. You want to say it's absurd, over the top, like a bad play. But then you realise how real it is. That fire in their voices isn't performance. It's policy. One fist at a time. You notice one of them has a fresh cut on his knuckle. Another has a rosary hanging from his belt, not worn, just taken. A trophy from last night, maybe. Someone else's prayer beads now swinging like a warning. Down the block, an Irish woman pulls her children closer as she passes. She doesn't look at them. She doesn't look at you. She's just moving fast, silently hoping she gets home without being noticed. What's truly haunting is how normalised it all is. This isn't riot season. This is daily life. The hatred is built into the bricks. You could scrape the soot off the walls and find slurs carved beneath it. Gangs like the Bowery Boys don't just thrive on rage, they depend on it. And the Dead Rabbits? They've become the flip side of that coin. A reactionary force just as violent, just as organised, and just as unwilling to back down. You round a corner and see a crude flag hanging from a window. A hand-drawn American flag with one change. The stars replaced with crosses. It's not patriotism, it's ownership. A message to the Irish. You can live here, but it will never be yours. You keep walking, ears ringing with the sound of footsteps behind you. You don't turn around. If someone's following you, they'll make themselves known when they're ready. Or not at all. One more thought sticks with you. In a city that prides itself on freedom and opportunity, the most powerful expression of that freedom, in 5 points, is the freedom to hate loudly and punch harder. And tonight, that freedom is going to be exercised. Night falls fast in 5 points, as if the sun wants nothing to do with what happens after dark. You can't blame it. The street lamps flicker weakly, casting long shadows that seem to crawl on their own. This part of the city breathes differently once the shops close and the honest folks, what few there are, bolt their doors. The crime doesn't start at night, it just gets comfortable. You step cautiously into what used to be an alley and has since been transformed into a saloon district. It's a place the police rarely visit, and when they do, they arrive with their hands out, not their batons drawn. The air here is different, thicker, sweeter, soaked with perfume, pipe smoke, spilled liquor, and something that might be blood, but no one seems concerned enough to check. This is the underground economy of New York, and you're not invited, you're just tolerated. Above the doorways are wooden signs painted in lurid reds and greens. The Blue Lantern, the Scarlet Smile, the Widow's Parlour. Some don't bother with names at all, just symbols, playing cards, snakes, a cracked mirror. These aren't just drinking holes, they're dens of vice, equal parts bar, brothel, gambling house and gang office. Inside the Blue Lantern, candles line the walls, melted into bottles and skulls, casting dancing shadows over cracked wallpaper. A fiddle plays in the corner, off-key and fast, and a man sings in Irish as someone gets a tattoo in the back room. At the bar, 2 dead rabbits are whispering over a map of the neighbourhood, while a woman with too much makeup and a chipped tooth leans across them, blowing smoke into their faces. She's not interested in either of them. She's interested in whatever's in their pockets. Welcome to the heart of slum nightlife, where money flows in illegal streams and loyalty is measured in how quickly someone stabs your enemy without being asked. Here's your historical fact. By the mid-1800s, there were over 500 saloons operating in New York City, many of them in slum neighbourhoods. These weren't just places to get drunk. They were the unofficial city halls of the underworld. Deals were made, murders were planned, bribes were organised, and everyone, cops, criminals, clergy, had a seat at the bar. One fringe fact for you, some of these saloons doubled as anatomical theatres after hours. Not in the medical sense, in the morbid entertainment sense. That's right, dead bodies on display, either as cautionary tales or as entertainment for the night's drunker, darker patrons. This is what happens to snitches, someone would say, pointing at a body with a slit throat and a poorly carved message on its chest. Real or staged? No one ever asked. You walk into the Widow's Parlour next, and it's worse. The lighting is lower, the face is rougher. Here, the gangs mix freely but uneasily. Shirt tails in one corner, plug uglies near the back, a Bowery boy leaning too far into a conversation with a rabbit, both pretending not to reach for their knives. This is where the underworld cross-pollinates. A plug ugly might buy stolen goods from a rabbit. A prostitute might pass a message between 2 gangs in exchange for protection. Information is the most valuable currency here. More than whiskey, more than stolen watches. You see it in the way people talk. Short, careful, every word has weight. Every sentence means more. In the back, you spot a man playing dice alone. He's not really playing, he's waiting. Sure enough, someone joins him. They don't shake hands, they just roll the dice, say 3 sentences and walk away. A deal's been made. You'll probably hear about the result tomorrow when someone turns up face down in a coal bin. Now for a scholarly debate. Some historians argue that these underground saloons were critical survival hubs for the poor. They offered warmth, food, company, things often missing in the rest of their lives. Others point out that they exploited the community, sucking what little money people had in exchange for rot-gut gin and the illusion of safety. Were they sanctuaries or traps? It's complicated, like everything here. You step back into the street and catch sight of something across the way. A wooden shack lit by a single red lantern. You've heard of this one. It's not a bar, it's an opium den. These places are newer to the neighbourhood, imported from Chinatown and barely understood by the wider gang community. But they're spreading one dazed soul at a time. You peek inside, the smell hits you, sweet, cloying, almost pleasant until you realise it's the smell of escape. People lie sprawled on straw mats, eyes half-lidded, mouth slack. One man giggles softly at the ceiling, another hasn't moved in what feels like hours. A third is being gently shaken by a woman who looks like she gave up hope a few minutes ago. You don't stay long. That kind of quiet is too quiet. And just like that, you start to understand why these places thrive. When your days are filled with beatings and starvation, a bottle of gin or a pipe full of smoke feels like freedom, even if it kills you. Especially if it kills you slowly. Death in doses is a luxury here. Outside again, you walk past a brothel where 3 women sit on the front steps like queens on thrones. They catcall passers-by, laugh too loudly, and toss bones from a dice game at a stray dog. But the moment a man in a clean black coat walks by, a man with a gold ring and soft hands, they straighten up. This one's important, not a client, a collector. The economy of vice doesn't run itself. Behind every bar fight and backroom deal is a system, a loose, violent, whisper-fed system of kickbacks, rackets, and muscle. A portion of every stolen wallet, every bottle sold, every bed rented goes somewhere up the chain, to someone no one ever sees, but everyone fears. Another fringe theory? Some of the most successful saloons were actually owned by police officers, hiding behind fake names and second cousins. Think about it. A cop owns the bar, his gang friends drink there. His rivals get tossed out or beaten in the alley. And if someone dies inside, the report gets lost. You turn down a side street, ears still ringing with laughter, music and the occasional scream. You pass a drunk man being helped along by 2 others, maybe friends, maybe not. You glance back a few seconds later, they're gone. So is his wallet, probably. This is the reality of the 5 Points nightlife. It's not just sin for fun, it's an industry wrapped in flickering light and sour breath. And it feeds everyone, from the lowest sneak thief to the highest political fixer. Even if you want nothing to do with it, you're part of it the moment you step into the glow. You find yourself at the edge of the chaos again. On a rooftop now, looking down at the streets below. The bars still buzz, fights still bubble, deals are struck, secrets traded. Somewhere down there, someone's making a choice they won't come back from. And you realise something chilling. In this neighbourhood, vice isn't the opposite of survival. Sometimes it's the only form of survival that works. Morning breaks like an insult, brash, loud and unwelcome. The sun spills over the rooftops, casting its indifferent light across crumbling bricks, trash-strewn alleys, and the slumped forms of those who didn't quite make it home last night. You step out into the chill air, boots crunching through broken glass and yesterday's regrets. It's barely 6 a.m, and already 5 Points is stretching its limbs, hungover and mean. You pass a storefront with a shattered window, a broom sweeping quietly behind it. No one talks about what happened, they just clean. That's the rhythm here. Violence comes, then the broom. You learn to live in between, and then, as if summoned by the stink of still-burning coal and the sour waft of liquor sweat, the kids start to appear. Not just any kids, the slum children, the feral heartbeat of 5 Points. They're everywhere. Climbing lampposts, darting between horses, hanging from balconies like human vines. Some are barefoot, some wear shoes 2 sizes too big, and nearly all of them have that same hollow-eyed stare, alert, twitchy, ready to bolt or bite depending on what the moment demands. You round a corner and see a crew of them already at work. One's selling rags, another's got a stack of stolen newspapers. A third is juggling for coins outside a saloon that doesn't even close anymore. These aren't hobbies, these are survival strategies, and make no mistake, many of these kids aren't just scraping by, they're organised. Some run in packs with names like the Alley Rats, the Pine Street Boys, or the Gopher Gang. Sure, they're young, but they're dangerous, quick with a blade and quicker with an excuse. You give them too much attention, and you might find yourself missing a pocket watch, or a finger. You see a group of them leaning against a wall, playing a game that involves knives, a crate, and a lot of muttered curses. You don't understand the rules, but you understand the stakes. One boy walks away with a coin, and the others nurse fresh cuts. Blood is just part of it. Here's your historical bite. In the mid-1800s, the child population in New York's slums was astronomical. Some estimates claim that up to 1/3 of 5 Points residents were under the age of 16. Many were orphans. Others were abandoned. Some had families so broken that the streets were safer. They slept in hallways, under carts, in doorways, and sometimes in coffins, literal coffins, left out by undertakers. You duck into a shadowed alley and see one of these homes. A hollowed-out barrel turned on its side with a tattered blanket inside. Next to it, a girl sleeps curled like a cat, a piece of bread clutched tight to her chest like a treasure. She can't be older than 6. You want to wake her, but what would be the point? Now for your fringe fact, some of these slum kids were part of kidnap gangs. Yeah, let that sink in. They'd snatch other children, usually toddlers left alone for just a minute too long, and sell them off to factories, brothels, or benevolent societies that claimed to take them west. You know, for a better life. The reality was usually child labour, or worse, and often the kidnappers were only 11 or 12 themselves. You step over a pile of broken wood and catch sight of a tiny figure darting behind a cart. You follow, slowly, and find a boy digging through the trash. Not mindlessly, strategically. He pulls out bones, bread crusts, a scrap of cloth. He's building a meal or maybe a business. He sees you watching and freezes. You nod once and walk away. He keeps his haul. Not every kid is solo. Some run with gangs, not the child crews, but the big boys. The dead rabbits and shirttails have youth lookouts, errand runners. Even in forces in training, there were not mascots, there are recruits. If you can stab someone at 12, you might get to rob a bank at 15. That's the dream. That's the ladder. One of the alley gangs strolls past you now. They walk like they've seen more than you ever will. One is covered in bruises. Another has a sling. The smallest carries a sock filled with rocks. They don't look at you. You don't look at them. This is the code. And then there are the girls. There are not street urchins. They're operators. You pass a candy stall and see a girl with wild red curls smiling sweetly at a man while her friend slips a bottle of gin into her coat behind him. One distracts. One scores. Then they vanish like smoke. These girls don't just survive. They thrive. Often. Better than the boys. Because people underestimate them. Some of them work brothels by age 13. Some run their own black market stalls, selling whatever fell off a wagon or out of someone's pocket. Some go into information. If you've got ears and know how to keep a secret, you're worth gold in a city where secrets get people killed. There's an ongoing academic argument. Were these children victims or villains? Some scholars say they were a byproduct of poverty, chewed up by an uncaring system. Others insist they made choices, had agency, created hierarchies and economies of their own. The truth, like everything in 5 points, it's both. A child can be starving and still cut your throat for your boots. Sympathy doesn't keep you warm. You wander into an open courtyard where a man is trying to teach a group of kids how to read. He's got a blackboard propped on crates and a stack of ragged books. The kids listen. Sort of. Until one starts a fight. Then they all scatter. The man sighs, picks up a book and starts again with whoever remains. You wonder how long he'll last. Then you hear the bell. A soft clang from the mission house a block over. It's breakfast. Bread and soup if you're early enough. The kids start running, not walking, sprinting like rats fleeing smoke. You follow, and outside the mission, the line is already growing. Dozens of children, silent, waiting, clutching tin cups and cracked bowls. Some look barely old enough to stand. Others lean on crutches, bandages peeking from under coats. None of them complain. They know better. The woman serving soup smiles gently, handing out ladles with a kindness that feels completely out of place here. She thanks each child. Some thank her back. One spits in the dirt, another tries to sneak back in line. He gets caught and cuffed. Still worth a try. You sit on the edge of the mission steps and watch them eat. No laughter, no games, just quiet, focused survival. Some kids trade bites, others hunch over their bowls like dogs guarding meat. A few don't eat at all, just hold the bowl like it's the last good thing they'll ever get. This is what childhood looks like in 5 points. Not hopscotch and lullabies. Just cold breath and warm soup. And maybe, if you're lucky, a gang that takes you in before the street kills you first. As the line fades, one girl stays behind. She's small, maybe 9, with a face that could belong to anyone. She walks past you slowly, pauses, and says, "You look like someone who hasn't learned yet." Then she's gone. And you realise she's right. The sky is grey and sullen, hanging low over the city like a bad omen you can't outrun. You hear it before you see it. The rising hum of voices, boots pounding against cobblestone, shouted curses, clanging bells. It rolls toward you like thunder, and smells like viol pool soaked in sweat. Something's happening, something bigger than a bar fight or a turf war. You can feel it in your bones. The city's holding its breath, and soon it's going to scream. This is not just another brawl in the gutters, this is the draft riots. You're in 1863 now? Yeah, we're leaping forward a few years. Don't worry, 5 Points hasn't changed much. Still crooked buildings, still rats that look you in the eye. But now there's a new layer of rage bubbling under the surface, and it's about to boil over. The cause? A draft, not a breeze. A military draft. Union needs more bodies for the Civil War, and the government has decided it's time to start pulling names out of a barrel. Problem is, if you're rich, you can pay $300 to avoid it. That's about a year's wages for a working man. So guess who ends up fighting? Poor men, immigrants, the Irish, people who are already drowning, now being told they have to die for a country that doesn't even want them, and they're not having it. You're standing on 3rd Avenue when the first wave hits. A crowd of angry men, dock workers, bricklayers, barbers, gang members, all shoulder to shoulder are marching toward the draft office. They are not chanting, they're growling, holding bricks, pipes, cudgels. A few even carry guns, rusted and shaky, but real enough to do damage. This isn't a protest. This is a mob. The draft office looks like it's been bracing for this moment. The windows are boarded. A few frightened clerks peek out from behind the curtains. Then someone throws the first stone. You don't see who, but you hear the glass break, and suddenly the crowd erupts. They storm the building, kicking down doors, flipping desks, setting papers on fire. Draft records burn in an instant, flames licking the walls like they've been waiting for permission. A young boy climbs onto a table and waves a piece of smoking parchment like a victory flag. This is only the beginning. The city falls into chaos over the next few days, and 5 Points is ground zero. Gangs like the Dead Rabbits take to the streets in full force, not just fighting, but leading. They're angry, organised, and completely unleashed. What started as a protest against the draft mutates into something darker, fouler. Racism, already a poison in these streets, now floods the air like smoke. Because for some in the mob, it's not just about class, it's about colour. Irish immigrants, themselves marginalised, turn their rage toward black New Yorkers, blaming them for the war, the draft, the economy, and every bit of their misery. It doesn't make snot good, it doesn't need to. Hate never does. And suddenly you're watching people who once fought for scraps, now chasing their neighbours with ropes and fire. Here's your historical gut punch. During the draft riots of 1863, hundreds of black residents were beaten, tortured, and murdered in the streets. Homes were looted, churches were burned, orphanages, yes, orphanages, were destroyed. The mob dragged people from their beds and killed them in daylight. The violence wasn't targeted, it was rabid. You're standing at the edge of what used to be a quiet lane when you see flames rising from a tenement. A woman screams from an upper window, a child in her arms. Below, the crowd chants, "Burn it," like it's a party. You feel sick, you should. There's a fringe story that still makes historians' voices crack, about a young black man who tried to hide in a barrel, only to be found, dragged out and hanged from a lamppost while the crowd laughed and spat. A photograph of the aftermath exists, yellowed and grainy. People still argue whether it's real, but whether it is or not, it reflects something that definitely was. Not every gang member took part in the violence. Some refused, some even fought back, protecting neighbours, putting out fires, but they were the exception. Most saw the chaos as a ladder, a chance to climb, even if it meant climbing over corpses. The police, already outnumbered, were helpless. Some joined the rioters, others barricaded themselves inside precincts. The army had to be called in. Actual Union troops marching through Manhattan, bayonets fixed, firing into crowds to restore order, blood on both sides, and still the mobs burned and tore and screamed. There's an academic debate about whether this was truly a gang riot, or something larger. But the truth is it was both. The infrastructure of gang life, its networks, loyalties, grudges, and triggers fed the fire. The draft riots were not spontaneous. They were a culmination. A powder keg lit by poverty, racism, politics, and fear. You walk past what used to be a bar. The sign still hangs, crooked, blackened by soot. Inside it, everything's destroyed. Tables splintered, bottles shattered, blood on the wall. No one has cleaned, no one dares. Later, you pass a woman dragging her son through the rubble-strewn streets. She whispers, "Keep your eyes down, don't speak, don't look white, don't look black, just look small." The boy nods, and he knows this game, and all around you the city still smoulders. The draft riots lasted 5 days. 5 days of hell that left more than 100 people dead, some say many more. Entire neighbourhoods were gutted, trust shattered, communities broken, and when the fires were finally put out, when the soldiers rolled back their cannons and the gang leaders went underground again, the city didn't apologise. It didn't grieve, it just moved on. Business as usual. Another page in the bloody book of New York, but 5 Points remembered, the charred buildings remembered, the children remembered, the gangs remembered it, and that anger. It didn't die, it just went quiet, waiting for the next excuse. You'd think after the draft riots, after 5 days of blood and fire, the city might have learned something, maybe cleaned up a little, tried being less of a slow-motion disaster. But no, this is 5 Points. Nothing gets fixed here. It just gets meaner in a new direction. And now the line between the gangsters and the lawmen starts to fade, blur, and then disappear altogether. You notice it slowly at first. A cop standing a little too close to a rabbit lieutenant during a shakedown, arms crossed, face blank. A group of boys throwing rocks at a store, laughing, until a constable walks by, not to stop them, but to collect a cut. You see a brawl on the corner of Centre and Walker, 2 men hammering each other over a gambling debt, and the nearest patrolman is just watching, not because he can't stop it, because he doesn't want to. Here's the twisted reality. In the mid to late 1800s, New York City's police force was often indistinguishable from the gangs they were supposed to be fighting. Some were former gang members themselves, rehabilitated by a badge and a steady paycheck. Others were just smart enough to realise you didn't need to join a gang to benefit from one. You just needed to make yourself useful. You follow a beat cop now, his name's probably O'Malley or Doyle, or something equally badge-friendly. He walks with purpose, nodding at familiar faces, stepping over a drunk curled around a busted whiskey bottle. He stops at a butcher shop. You watch from a distance as the butcher hands him a brown envelope. No words exchanged, just a nod, a practiced routine. Protection money. That's not a gang tax anymore. That's a police tax. There's your history fact. In the 1860s and beyond, New York's police were deeply entangled with organised crime. Some entire precincts operated like gang headquarters, controlling neighbourhoods with intimidation, shakedowns and selective enforcement. A rival gang causes trouble. Suddenly the cops show up. Your gang beats someone bloody in the street. No report filed. Maybe a handshake after. And don't forget Tammany Hall, still greasing every wheel with whiskey and whispered promises. They made sure their chosen cops rose in rank. The gangs kept Tammany in power. Tammany kept the cops paid and blind. And the poor? They were just bodies caught in the gears. Now for the fringe bit, there were rumours, strong ones, that some police captains actually ran their own gangs, using low-level thugs to do their dirty work off duty. One former cop, after being fired, claimed he had personally overseen illegal boxing matches, extortion rings and brothel protection schemes while wearing the uniform. He was discredited quickly, of course. A little too quickly. You turn onto Worth Street and see a familiar symbol. A white star painted on a door. It's a gang mark. Or maybe a cop mark. These days, who can well tell? That's part of the game. The gangsters have learned to wear the law's face, the cops have learned to carry themselves like gang lords. Both speak in threats. Both get paid in fear. There's a little saloon on the corner half sunk into the street, where a constable is seated at the bar, hat off, shirt rolled, drink in hand. He's laughing with a group of men who you know for a fact are part of the Plug Uglies. You recognise the busted teeth and hat brims, but in here, they're not enemies, they're co-workers. You step outside and watch 2 officers drag a young boy into an alley. His face is already bruised, but they're not arresting him. They're robbing him. One rifles his pockets while the other whispers threats. Tell your brother we don't forget debts. Then they let him go. The boy limps off and the cops light cigars. Here's the academic tug of war. Were these cops genuinely corrupt, or were they just surviving the only way they could? Some say the system was so broken that even good men had to become villains. Others argue that power just attracts rot, and the badge was always just a license to exploit. You stop in front of the old Mulberry Street station house, a squat fortress of soot-streaked brick. You've heard things about this place. That evidence goes in and never comes out. That confessions are helped along with fists. That the cells are full of poor kids while real criminals drink upstairs with sergeants. You walk past it fast, and then you see something that chills you more than any corpse. A rabbit and a cop sharing a cigarette. Not a tense handshake. Not a bribery handoff. Just 2 men leaning against a stoop, smoking, joking, laughing. They nod at you like you're interrupting a private moment. This is the future of the city. Gangs aren't going anywhere. they're just putting on uniforms. You hear whispers of something new forming. Gangs that aren't just street punks but businessmen, wrapping themselves in law and structure. They have titles, ledgers, lawyers, and sometimes they have badges. If the streets are too hot, they move into precincts, courthouses, even City Hall. That little shift you're feeling under your boots, that's power realigning itself. One more note for the conspiracy lovers. Some believe that the entire criminal justice system in 19th century New York was built by gang logic. You protect your own, you punish outsiders, loyalty over law, money over morals, and if you've got enough dirt on the right people, you'll never see a courtroom. You pass a newsboy shouting about a murder. "Gang killing in the Bowery," he screams. But no one listens. No one needs to. It's not news, it's background noise. And that's the danger now. Not the knives, not the fists, but the quiet deals, the lines crossed behind doors, the fact that the person kicking in your door might be wearing a badge and calling it justice. The gangs used to fight the cops. Now, they are the cops. You'd think most people would want to stay as far away from 5 Points as humanly possible. It's violent, diseased, collapsing under its own stink, and crawling with criminals who smile when they boycott you. But no, some people pay good money to get closer. Not to live here, of course, just to look, to gawk, to tour the slums like a zoo. It starts with the whispers, uptown types, bankers, professors, politicians, leaning over dinner tables and saying things like, "Did you hear about the 5 Points? I heard they eat rats right off the bone down there." Or, "I hear they tattoo babies and sell them to pirates." Wild stories, most of them false. Some uncomfortably true, but the point isn't truth, the point is entertainment. And soon enough, these stories start selling tickets. You find yourself walking behind a group now, clearly not from around here. Their clothes are too clean, their boots too polished, and their eyes way too wide. They're led by a squat man in a grey waistcoat, who keeps one hand on a walking stick and the other gesturing at every rotting building like he's narrating a horror play. "To your left," he says with flair, "you'll see what remains of the old brewery, once home to over 1,200 souls stacked wall to wall in squalor." The group gasps. A woman lifts her handkerchief to her nose. A young man scribbles in a leather notebook. You half expect applause. These are slum tourists. And yes, they were a real thing. By the mid-1800s it became fashionable, especially among the upper middle class, to take guided tours of the city's worst neighbourhoods. 5 Points was the crown jewel. Companies charged fees to walk well-dressed customers past the filth and danger, letting them peek into a world they'd never understand from behind the safety of their carriage windows. You pass another group clustered near a tenement, where laundry flaps like surrender flags. The guide points to a stain on the bricks, dried blood maybe, and gives a dramatic monologue about gang killing that may or may not have happened. "Here," he says, voice low and ominous, "is where the infamous rabbit brawler Paddy the Pike met his end, brained with a spittoon." No one asks for proof, they just clutch their coats tighter. You step back and watch them shuffle past a mother holding a baby and a sack of onions. She doesn't look up. She's seen the gawkers before. Maybe she's even been paid a coin or two to pose near a broken window. Some families stage their misery for these tours. It's one of the few ways to make money when you've got nothing but poverty and time. Your history bite. These tours weren't just informal street shows. They were institutionalized. Journalists joined them. Clergy came along to pray. Sometimes even politicians tagged along to see the conditions while ignoring the people themselves. Famous reformers like Jacob Riis used lantern slate-lead presentations to showcase the horrors of the slums, turning poverty into theatre. And the public couldn't get enough. Here's a little fringe detail. In some cases, gangs actually worked with tour guides. That's right. They'd agree not to harm tourists, or even act out in dramatic fashion, so long as the guide paid a cut of the ticket profits. It was like running a stage show. You do the scary bit, I'll do the narration. We both make rent. You walk past a young couple posing in front of a graffiti-covered alley. The woman grins like she's in some twisted honeymoon photo. The man holds up a cane like a sword. Behind them, a child digs through trash. They don't notice. A few steps later, you see a small chalkboard hanging from a nail on a tenement wall. It reads, "Screaming woman, 5 cents. Someone's clearly made a show of the corner window where a woman yells at invisible figures in bursts of rage. Locals ignore her. Tourists gawk and toss coins. If it feels dehumanizing, that's because it is. But here's the paradox. Sometimes those coins make the difference between eating and starving. In a place with no safety net, misery becomes a business model. And then there's the reformers, the good tourists. You see them too, wide-eyed men in vests and clerical collars, women in sensible shoes and earnest frowns. They tour the neighbourhood not for the thrill, but for redemption. They come bearing pamphlets, prayers and free Bibles. You pass a group now handing out loaves of bread and tracts titled "Salvation from Sin." One boy takes the bread, spits on the tract, and walks away chewing. A missionary woman gasps. Her companion gently turns her away. They just don't know any better, he says. But maybe they do. The thing about slum tourism is that it never leads to real change. The tourists leave, the streets stay broken. Maybe a few new soup kitchens pop up or a tenement gets painted once every decade. But nothing shifts. The gangs remain, the filth lingers, the children grow up and inherit the knives. There's a scholarly debate on whether this early tourism helped or hurt. Some argue that exposure led to reform. Others insist it was a form of poverty porn, a spectacle for the privileged to feel better about themselves, a living diorama of the city's failure. You keep following the crowd until you hear a scream. Real, not staged. A young boy, no more than 10, has snatched a woman's purse and bolted. She cries out. Her husband starts after him but trips on his own polished boots. The boy vanishes into the alley like smoke. The group stands in stunned silence. Then awkwardly, the guide clears his throat. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes today's demonstration of slum life. Please watch your pockets on the way back to your carriages. The tourists laugh nervously. They don't come back. You do. Because this isn't a show. It's a system. The tours may have gasped at the bloodstains, but they never stuck around long enough to see who scrubbed them clean. They watched the gangs swagger by but never saw the funerals afterward. They heard about crimes but never listened to the why. And maybe they don't want to. You walk alone again now, back into the unlit parts, the real 5 Points, where the air's thicker, the windows are darker, and the stories don't end in applause. There are no tickets here, only scars. It starts with smoke, not the usual curling ribbons from coal stoves or chimney stacks. This smoke is darker, meaner, born from flame and soaked in oil. It clings to your clothes, bites your eyes, makes your throat itch like it knows something you don't. And then, corre. Hear it. The shrill ring of a bell, the thunder of boots, and the chaotic sound of fire brigades tearing through the streets, yelling, pushing, colliding. But don't get it twisted. These guys aren't here to save lives, not really. You're watching gangs in uniform. The firehouses in mid-1800s New York weren't what you'd hope. They were turf headquarters, political instruments, and sometimes full-blown criminal operations. Volunteer fire companies were supposed to protect the city from burning to the ground. Instead, they often helped it burn faster, especially if someone's insurance was up to date. You follow the clamour to Baxter Street, where smoke curls up from the roof of a tenement that already looks half collapsed. A bucket line has formed, mostly kids and desperate tenants passing water hand to hand, but the real show comes around the corner, a bright red wagon pulled by a team of angry men in matching shirts and matching scowls. The engine gleams, their boots stomp in unison. At the front is a guy with a silver whistle and a club hanging from his belt like a promise. This is Engine Company 22, unofficially known as the Slaughterhouse Boys. Officially, they're a fire brigade. In practice, they're a faction of the Plug Uglies, and they don't put out fires unless it benefits them. Sometimes they light them. Insurance scams were a steady business back then. If a store wasn't paying protection, or if a gang needed quick cash, flames did the talking. You watch them argue with the Engine Company 14, who show up 30 seconds later, wearing green kerchiefs and looking just as mean. These guys are dead rabbit affiliated, and they don't care who set the fire. They just want credit, and whatever valuables haven't burned yet. Soon the argument turns to shoving, then fists. Two men crash into the gutter, swinging as the building behind them smoulders like a warning. The residents scream for help from the windows. One man tries to lower a baby in a basket. No one catches it. The fighting firemen ignore the flames. Here's your historical footnote. Rival fire companies in 19th century New York would often race each other to blazes, not to help, but to claim territory and rewards. Whichever company arrived first got paid by the city, so they'd sabotage each other's wagons, fist fight in the streets, and sometimes destroy their rivals' hoses mid-fire. People died. Businesses burned. But someone always made a profit. There's a fringe rumour that some companies carried fake victims on their engines, children covered in soot and screams rehearsed, just to make a better case for compensation. Were they actors? Were they just orphans trained in terror? Hard to say, but if a show could turn into cash, you can bet they knew their lines. You edge around the chaos and duck into an alley. Smoke is thick now, turning the world soft and orange. Someone runs past you with a sack slung over their back, loot probably. In these fires, it's every man for himself. But the gangs? They're playing chess. They've already mapped which rooms to check, which safes to break open. Sometimes they leave their own neighbourhoods alone just so no one gets suspicious. And sometimes they burn the homes of rivals. You hear a crash and see a wall collapse, sending sparks flying. Screams echo down the alley. Another family's lost everything. Meanwhile, a slaughterhouse boy slaps another on the back and says, "That'll teach the rats to skip payments." You want to believe he's just venting, but the way he grins, he's not. Back on the main street, a group of young boys hoses down each other instead of the fire. The engine is just for show now. The building's lost, they all know it. They just want to make sure they look busy when the city inspectors roll by tomorrow, if they roll by at all. There's a theory among some historians that the gangs embedded in these fire brigades use the fires not only for money, but as a weapon of fear. Set enough fires in a rival's neighbourhood and people start moving out. Suddenly, property values drop. Your buddies at Tammany Hall swoop in, buy cheap, then rebuild. You've just cleared a block without firing a shot. You find yourself near a pile of soaked furniture. Half-burned chairs, a mattress leaking black water, and a photo frame melted to its glass. A woman sits on the curb barefoot, holding a scorched kettle like it's a child. Her husband's arguing with a man in a Bowery boy's coat, accusing him of delaying the hose on purpose. The Bowery man just shrugs. "Should have paid when you had the chance." She doesn't cry, she just pulls the kettle closer. Farther down, another engine arrives. This one looks official. City seal on the side, boots polished, badges in place. But the way they walk, the way they look around, it's clear they're just another gang in a nicer coat. They'll take the names, write the reports, pocket the bribes. Maybe throw in a warning or two if the numbers don't line up. There's a long-running academic argument about whether the fire brigades were primarily criminal or just a product of poor organisation. Some say it wasn't gangs, just chaos, too many volunteers, not enough oversight. But others point to the pattern, the same names, the same neighbourhoods, the same businesses burning again and again. You pass a wall with a fresh drawing, charcoal still smudged. A rabbit with fire in its eyes. A message. You're guessing someone's planning a visit to enemy turf soon, and it's not going to be friendly. And here's the worst part. You realise the fire isn't just smoke and ashes anymore. It's systemic. It's a tool. These aren't accidents. These are messages in flame. And as long as the fire trucks keep rolling, the gangs keep profiting. You hear the distant clang of another bell, another fire, another show. And you wonder who's next, because in this city, the flames always find a home. You've walked these streets long enough to know that anything labelled a mission in 5 points comes with an asterisk. A mission might be a soup kitchen, a church, a place to sleep, or a thin excuse to tell you your life is an abomination while handing you a crust of bread. But sometimes, rarely, it's something more. And on this smoke-stained morning you find yourself in front of the most famous one of all, the 5 Points Mission House. It looks out of place, too clean, too upright. A 2-storey brick building wedged between 2 sagging tenements, its windows whole, its door painted a fresh, defiant white. There's a cross etched into the stone above the door, and a banner fluttering from a crooked pole, "Hope for all." Sure, good luck with that. Inside, the air smells of boiled potatoes and floor polish. A line of tired faces winds toward a steaming pot. Volunteers move with mechanical grace, scooping, handing, nodding, repeating the same gentle words over and over. You recognise some of the people in line. A Bowery boy with his hat off. A mother who runs a dice game on Canal Street. A girl you saw pulling rings off a drunk last week. In here, everyone's just hungry. The knives stay tucked away for now. The 5 Points Mission was founded in 1850 by a mix of Methodists and social reformers, true believers who thought that even the filthiest sinner could be saved with a good meal, a clean shirt, and a heavy dose of scripture. They set up shop right in the middle of gang country, between brothels and bars and a declared war on hopelessness. History fact incoming: this was the first official settlement house in the United States. Its mission was simple: help the poor. Feed them, teach them, house them, and of course convert them. Religion was baked into every service like raisins in stale bread. You could get help here, but only if you listen to the sermon. You sit on a bench near the back of the hall, watching as a preacher stands about on a crate and reads from a worn Bible. His voice trembles, half from passion, half from exhaustion. The wages of sin is death, he proclaims, just as a kid burps loudly and someone drops a spoon. The preacher presses on. It would be easy to roll your eyes, but here's the thing, you can't. Not completely, because the people in this room aren't mocking him. They're listening. Not out of faith maybe, but because the only other voices in their lives are screams or threats. A soft voice reading from Psalms? That's practically music. You spot a girl in the corner, 8, maybe 9, sitting with a hymn book open in her lap. She's not reading it. She's tearing out the pages one by one, folding them into little paper boats. Her mother watches with a tired smile. They've been here before. For some, this place is a real lifeline. For others, it's a pit stop between crimes. And then there are the reformers themselves, those buttoned-up do-gooders from uptown who come here on weekends to ladle soup and deliver awkward lectures on the virtues of temperance. Most mean well, some don't. And the people here, they know the difference. Fringe detail for you. The mission used to offer moral check-ins. You could stay the night for free, but only after passing a brief interview. Were you drunk? Did you fight? Did you steal? Say yes to the wrong question and you were turned away into the cold. But lie well enough and you got a cot and a sermon. There's an ongoing debate among historians about the mission's true impact. Some say it saved thousands. Others argue it was more about saving souls than lives, that it cared more about washing away sin than curing disease. And then there's the cynical view that it was a PR stunt for uptown money, a human zoo wrapped in scripture. You walk past a classroom where a volunteer is teaching children their letters. The kids repeat the alphabet in dull unison. One is picking his nose, another stares at the wall. But a few are locked in, pencil in hand, brows furrowed. If they make it out, maybe it'll be because of this room. You exit into the yard, where a few men are chopping wood under the supervision of a wiry old deacon with a voice like gravel. Work makes you clean, he mutters as he passes. You're not sure that's true. Nothing in this place ever really gets clean. Beyond the mission's fence, life goes on. You see a brawl erupting 2 blocks down, smoke from another fire drifting lazily into the sky. A drunk vomits in an alley. Somewhere a baby wails. But here, inside this fragile bubble, there's order. It's not much, but it's something. And of course, the gangs don't leave it alone. The mission is a target, always has been. Sometimes it's just graffiti on the walls, crude jokes or threats scrawled in charcoal. Sometimes it's worse. A rock through a window, a fire lit in the night. The gangs see it as trespassing, a moral army marching into their battlefield uninvited. But sometimes those same gangs send their children here. That's the contradiction that sticks in your mind. A man might slit someone's throat in the morning and bring his daughter to Bible class in the afternoon. A thief might donate stolen bread to the mission's pantry. A killer might leave a coin on the doorstep. Morality here is not a straight line. It's a circle, scratched into the dirt with a bloody finger. You sit outside as the sun sinks lower, casting long shadows across the mission's yard. The preacher steps out, wiping sweat from his brow. He lights a pipe, not exactly by the book, but who's counting? He looks at you and nods. We lose most of them, he says, but sometimes one walks out different. You nod back. What else is there to say? Maybe he's right. Maybe not. But in a city where even the rats carry knives, a little kindness is a kind of rebellion. And in 5 Points, rebellion comes in many forms. The wind off the Hudson always carries a chill, no matter the season. Even in the thickest summer heat, the docks stay damp and grey, the water slapping lazily against rotting pilings like it's trying to remind you what waits beneath. You're standing at the edge now, southwest of 5 Points, where the buildings thin out and the scent of brine and coal dust replaces the usual cocktail of human sweat and despair. It almost feels quiet here. Peaceful, even, but don't let it fool you. This is where the bodies go. The river is the final resting place for secrets. The gangs may rule the alleys and tenements, but down here, along the wharfs and warehouses, they dispose of their unfinished business. No judges, no graves, just the current, the cold and the silence. You peer over the edge of a pier where the water is black and sluggish. Something bobs just beneath the surface. Driftwood? Maybe. Probably not. Bodies in the river aren't exactly rare. People fall, jump or get pushed. The city even has a name for them: floaters. Sometimes the police fish them out, sometimes the rats get there first. Often, no one bothers. One more corpse doesn't make the news. Not here, not when the streets churn out more every day. You pass 2 dock workers rolling a barrel toward a boat. They pause as you approach. One lights a cigarette and leans casually against the side. The other rests a foot on the barrel like he's daring you to ask what's inside. You don't. Smart move. Here's your historical fact. In the 1800s, New York's docks were one of the most dangerous places in the city. Not just because of accidents and shady labour practices, though those were rampant, but because they were a hotspot for murders, disappearances, and gang executions. The docks were the edge of the map. Once you crossed into the tide, you were out of reach. Of justice, of mercy, of memory. Gangs used the rivers like dumpsters. Plug uglies, Bowery boys, dead rabbits, they all had wet men, specialists who handled disposal. A knife in the ribs, a rock tied to the ankles, and into the drink you went. The East River, the Hudson, didn't care, they took it all. And if a body washed up later, well, tides happen, who could say when or where it went in? Fringe fact, there were whispered tales of death skiffs, unmarked rowboats that would glide out at night from secret docks behind warehouses. The oars silent, the crew masked, the cargo never seen again. You won't find records of these boats, just rumours, and a few too many missing persons reports that start near the waterfront. You walk into a warehouse now, abandoned, half-collapsed, beams sagging like broken bones. Inside you find the remnants of something not quite gone, a rope hanging from a ceiling beam, a small stack of mouldy crates, and a dried trail that looks suspiciously like blood. Rats scatter as you step in. One stops, stares, and bolts through a crack in the wall. You've heard stories of dock justice, where gangs would settle disputes with one-on-one fights near the water. No interruptions, no weapons, just fists and rage. But sometimes the loser didn't walk away. Sometimes he didn't even float away, just slipped beneath the surface and was never seen again. Solves a lot of problems when no one ever finds a body. You step back into the fading sunlight and spot a small shrine built into the base of a seawall. Candles, trinkets, a photo nailed to a wooden post. A young man, maybe 17. Below it, a message scrawled in chalk. They threw him in. He didn't come back. You stand there a moment, and the wind makes the candles flicker, like they're nodding in agreement. The scholarly debate around these deaths is uncomfortable. Official records from the time often list drownings as accidental or unknown cause. Many of these cases involved immigrants, sex workers, homeless men, or known gang affiliates. People the city didn't bother investigating. Some historians argue that police willfully ignored waterfront crime due to corruption. Others claim the system was just overwhelmed. Either way, the result was the same. Ere you disappeared, and no one came looking. You follow a narrow catwalk that leads behind a row of shipping offices. The path is slick, the boards bowed. This is where people come to hide or to be hidden. In the distance, you see a figure watching the water. No motion, just still. It could be someone mourning, waiting, or guarding something. Or maybe it's just someone deciding whether to jump. You move past without drawing attention. That's the rule here. Don't ask, don't look, don't linger. Further down the docks, you find a group of men loading crates into a small barge. They speak in low tones, glancing around. The crates are unmarked, the ropes new. You catch a fragment of conversation, something about the new shipment and don't forget the salt. Salt? You know what that means. It's not for food, it's to slow decomposition. You keep walking, you're not meant to hear this. Down at Pier 12 you find the remnants of an old floating brothel. It's tilted now, half sunk, but the stories cling to it like mould. This was once a neutral ground, of sorts. A place where gangs brokered deals over girls and gin. And sometimes those deals ended with someone being tossed into the black. Even pleasure had a body count here. There's a rumour that a gang leader once had a traitor nailed to the deck of a scow, then set it adrift with a lantern and a bottle. By the time it was found, it was just bones and belt buckles. Whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. The fear it created? That's real enough. You crouch at the edge of the pier and watch the water move. It's deceptively calm, looks peaceful even. But the river is a liar. It hides things, holds them, swallows them. A police boat glides by, the officers laughing. One points to something floating and shrugs. They don't stop. You walk away before you can see what it was. The gangs may run the streets, but the river finishes their sentences. It's the final act, the last word, the unforgiving judge. In a world where death comes quick and justice comes late, or not at all, the water is the only thing that's always ready, and if you're unlucky enough to end up in its arms, there's no eulogy, no grave, no second chance, just the slow, quiet pull of the current. And a name that no one bothers to remember. You find yourself inside a bar, not one of the flashy saloons where gin flows like water and someone's always playing a fiddle. No, this one is darker, smaller, the kind of place where the floorboards are sticky and the bartender has a black eye older than his apron. The walls are sweating somehow. In the corner sits a man with a face like a leather boot and hands that look like they've broken more bones than they've shaken. The moment you walk in, you know, he's not just another drunk, he's someone people talk about. He's a gang legend. Not the biggest, not the richest, but the kind with stories around him like flies around a corpse. They call him Black-Eyed Billy or Rail Spike Bill, depending on who's telling it. Some say he once bit a man's ear off in a fight over a coin toss. Others claim he led a prison break through the sewers with nothing but a spoon. You doubt all of it. But then again, you look at him, and maybe not. This is a city that loves its villains. Here's your historical fact for the night. By the mid to late 1800s, gangsters in New York weren't just criminals, they were becoming folk heroes. Newspapers, penny dreadfuls, and dime novels ate it up. The public couldn't get enough of these larger-than-life thugs, especially if they had a nickname and a body count. The same people who lock their doors at night would drop a nickel to read about how Butcher Boy Johnny stabbed a police sergeant and escaped through a third-story window with a cigar still in his mouth. You stroll past a newsboy hawking papers, and there's a headline that grabs your eye. Murder at midnight, rabbit enforcer slays rival in saloon duel. Beneath it, a woodcut drawing of two men with pistols, frozen in heroic poses. Never mind that the real fight was probably a drunken stabbing in the dark. The press adds flair. Always does. Makes monsters into men. Makes men into myth. And the public. They love it. You overhear a woman in the bar telling a friend she saw Red Maggie once. The brothel madam who poisoned 3 cops and walked free. She winked at me, the woman says, grinning, like she knew I'd never forget it. And maybe she didn't. Stories stick harder than truth ever does. There's a fringe theory among historians that some of the most popular gang leaders paid off newspaper editors to play up their reputations, not just to look dangerous, but to look important. The idea was, if you became a name people feared or adored, you got more power. Fewer arrests, more recruits, you became more useful to Tammany Hall, or more valuable dead. You pass a barber shop where a man's getting a shave and reciting one of the most famous ballads in the city, the Ballad of Johnny Dolan. Johnny was a real gang killer who allegedly used a weighted club lined with razors. The newspapers called it a devil's cane. His crimes were horrific, but his nickname, instantly marketable. Within weeks, street performers were singing about him. Children played at Johnny Dolan's escape, leaping off stoops and pretending to bash in skulls. You can't make this up. Actually, you don't have to. This is how legends are born in the gutter. And the funny thing is, some of these so-called heroes knew it. They leaned into it. Wore flashy clothes, got tattoos that spelled their gang names in Gothic letters, posed for photographers with one hand on a pistol and the other in a waistcoat like they were Abraham Lincoln. They understood that image was everything. You could be the dumbest thug in the slums, but if you had a good nickname and a few stories, you were immortal. Take Gallus Mag, yes, we talked about her before, but think about how wild it is that a bar bouncer with a jar of ears became a tourist attraction. People came to see her, not avoid her, not run. They came to gawk. She was living folklore. Her bar became a hotspot because violence sells. And then there are the fake legends, the ones who never existed outside of fiction. Writers in dusty rooms churning out tales of Blackjack Mulligan or No-Nose Nellie, fictional outlaws who represented everything New York feared and secretly admired. These stories were printed by the thousands and sold at newsstands, train stations and back alleys. They painted the gangs as anti-heroes, bad men doing worse things to even worse people. Scholars still argue over what that did to the city's psyche. Did these tales romanticize crime, encourage it, or were they just the only form of recognition poor people ever got? In a society that spat on immigrants and ignored the starving, maybe a dime novel was the only place where a boy from Baxter Street could be remembered. You stop by a street performer reciting one of these tales by gaslight. A crowd has gathered. He acts out a scene where a dead rabbit bursts into a police station to rescue his brother, firing 2 pistols and yelling something noble about honour. The crowd laughs, cheers, someone drops a coin. You know the truth, that probably never happened. But you're caught in it too, because this city is built on a rotten foundation of storytelling and survival, and those two things are often the same. A few blocks away, in a tiny print shop, a man is hunched over a press, setting type for another gang tale. He doesn't care if it's true. He cares if it sells. He'll print 100 copies by dawn and have boys hawking them on every corner by breakfast. Blood in the Bowery, or rabbits run riot. Fireman fights 50. Choo. Titles like Punches, Truth, Optional. You walk past a tenement where someone's painted a mural on a broken wall. It shows a rabbit with glowing red eyes and angel wings. Beneath it, our saint of the streets. It's absurd, it's beautiful, it's what passes for sainthood here. Because in 5 points, you don't live forever by being good, you live forever by being remembered. Even if it's for the worst reasons. You hear them before you see them, boots striking pavement in perfect rhythm, voices raised in clipped barks, brass buttons glinting in the afternoon sun like tiny badges of control. This isn't some ragtag patrol stumbling down Baxter Street with half-empty pistols and whiskey on their breath. No, this is different. This is organised. Tidy, mean. It's not the gangs coming for you tonight. It's the police. Only this time they don't look all that different. You stand back against a lamppost, watching a column of uniformed men move like a machine. Clubs on their belts, guns at their hips, eyes forward. Some of the faces you recognise. A few of them used to run with the Bowery boys. One of them was a rabbit lookout, used to flash signals with a cracked mirror from the roof of a tenement. Now he's got a badge. He hasn't changed, just his hat. You're watching the rise of New York's police gangs, and yeah, that's the thing. It starts innocently enough. After the draft riots, after years of chaos, corruption, and completely useless volunteer patrols, the city decides it's time to get serious about law enforcement. And by serious, they mean organised, centralised, and well-armed. The Metropolitan Police Force is created. Sounds official, right? It is, on paper. But here's your historical fact in practice. This new force doesn't replace the gangs, it absorbs them. By the 1870s, many gang members are offered a choice: keep running the streets and get hunted, or join the force and wear the crime like a uniform. For a lot of them, it's a no-brainer. Same streets, same bribes, but now with legal authority and a pension if you survive long enough. You get to beat people up and sleep in your own bed? That's a promotion. There's a phrase that floats around during this time. Cops by day, criminals by night. You hear it whispered in bars, growled over card games, muttered by barbers leaning in too close. And it's not just a clever line, it's the truth. One of the most infamous police gangs is called the Strong Arm Squad. Sounds official, right? Sounds like something you'd send after a bank robber or a violent fugitive. But the reality? These guys are glorified enforcers. They shake down brothels, extort business owners, escort political enemies into alleys and beat them unconscious. And if anyone complains, the complaints get lost. You turn onto Centre Street and see two officers dragging a drunk into the back of a police wagon. But this guy's not screaming. He's laughing, slurring. "You boys working late tonight?" he cackles. One of the cops snorts and shoves him in with a wink. You know why he's laughing. He's one of them. This is just a ride, not an arrest. You pass a storefront that used to be a candy shop but is now something worse, a front. You don't even know what for. Gambling, maybe, or fencing stolen goods. But what you do know is that a police sergeant walks in every evening and walks out 20 minutes later counting money. You see it. Everyone sees it. No one says a word. Here's your fringe fact. Some officers in this era didn't just protect criminal enterprises. They ran them. Entire precincts were run like family businesses, with brothers, cousins, and old gang buddies running everything from bootlegging to blackmail. One legendary precinct in the Tenderloin district was nicknamed the Wickedest Ward because of how much vice its cops personally managed. And then there's the elections. You thought gang violence was bad? Try election season. That's when things get theatrical. Cops would escort favoured voters to the ballot box and escort unfavoured ones to the pavement. Tammany-backed officers would raid opposition rallies, rough up speakers, burn flyers. One political opponent got thrown in jail for disturbing the peace because he was handing out leaflets outside a saloon. The cop who arrested him used to be a rabbit, still carried a rabbit pin on his inside coat. There's an ongoing academic debate about this period. Were these rogue cops just bad apples, or was the system itself built rotten? Some scholars argue that the city needed any kind of control, even dirty control, that without these uniformed gangs, New York might have burned to the ground. Others say it was just crime in a prettier uniform, the same blade, now sheathed in blue wool. You cross paths with a patrolman who eyes you up and down. He doesn't say anything, just adjusts his nightstick and keeps walking. You don't breathe again until he turns the corner. That's the thing now, you fear the badge just as much as the knife. There's a sense of performance to it all. Cops show up where the press is. They bust up fake speakeasies for photo ops, arrest a few small-time hoods and shake hands with aldermen. But the real crime? That keeps going. As long as the right palms are greased, as long as the newspapers get their headlines and Tammany gets its votes, the machine hums along. You stop outside an old precinct house and watch as a man in handcuffs is led inside. He looks calm. Too calm. Like he knows someone inside will uncuff him, offer him a cigarette, and send him out the back door. You wait. 10 minutes later, he's walking down the alley with a grin. You nod. He nods back. That's the game. So what's the difference between a gang and a police squad in 5 points? The uniform. That's it. One gets arrested for extortion. The other writes reports about it. One stabs you in the alley. The other writes you a ticket for bleeding on the sidewalk, and you can't escape it. The corruption wraps itself around the city like ivy on brick. Even if you're clean, and very few are, you're forced to play along. If you don't pay the police tax, your windows get broken. If you don't vote the right way, your shop gets mysteriously flooded. If you speak out, you disappear. And then, of course, the river helps finish the job. You head home now, boots echoing on the cobbles. Somewhere behind you a whistle blows, sharp and shrill. It could be a signal. Could be nothing. You don't turn around. Because when the gangs wore street clothes, you could at least spot them coming. But when they wear badges, you never know which way to run. By the time you reach the lower end of Mott Street, the mood shifts. Just a little. The grime is still here. The buildings still lean inward like they're conspiring. But something quieter hums beneath the usual 5 points chaos. The noise dims. The air carries hints of something unfamiliar. Soy, ink, smoke, spices. You've stepped into Chinatown long before it's called that. A place that doesn't scream for attention like the rest of the city, but instead whispers secrets in the dark. You see them, men in long tunics with braided queues down their backs, slipping in and out of narrow doorways beneath hanging red lanterns. Their faces are unreadable, worn smooth by distance and silence. These are Chinese immigrants, most of them fresh off Pacific steamers, arriving with dreams no one here ever intends to honour. They came to build railroads, cook, clean, labour, and now they've carved out a sliver of space just tight enough to breathe. But breathing here isn't safe either. Because like everywhere else in 5 points, power attracts predators, and that includes the gangs. Only these ones don't look like the Bowery boys or the Dead Rabbits. They don't fight in the streets or smash each other's heads with cudgels. At least not often. The Chinese gangs are different. Quieter. Sharper. They don't leave blood in the gutters. They leave you wondering if the man who vanished ever existed. They're called tongs, and they're something entirely their own. Here's your historical fact. The word tong originally just meant hall or gathering place, mutual aid societies set up by Chinese immigrants to help each other survive in a hostile city. They pooled money, shared food, found lodging. It was community, not crime. At least at first. But when the city's hostility turned brutal, when Irish gangs attacked Chinese workers, when landlords refused them housing, when the police looked the other way, those same protective societies began growing teeth. And before long, the Tongs started behaving exactly like the other gangs. You pass a basement door flanked by 2 men who barely glance at you. Behind them is what looks like an apothecary, rows of drawers, dried herbs, maybe real medicine, but past the beaded curtain in the back, you'd find an opium den, a quiet one. Cushions, low tables, the smell of poppy smoke curling through the walls like a ghost's breath. And upstairs, you might find a gambling hall. Not loud, not rowdy, efficient. Men playing fan-tan or pai gow, the click of chips precise as a clock. Watch long enough and you'll notice who collects the money, who nods once and just once to someone in the corner. That's the Tongs lieutenant. He's not here for fun, he's here to record names. You keep moving through dim alleys with names that don't appear on maps, past signs written in brushstrokes you can't read. But it's clear that this part of the city runs on a different rhythm. Not slower, just less desperate. Like everything's calculated 10 steps ahead. Fringe fact for tonight. Some early Tongs were so structured, so well funded, that they ran their own underground banks, issuing loans, collecting interest, and even providing travel fare for smuggled workers, who would then work off their debt. Some call it slavery, some call it indentured servitude. The line between the two was, and is, paper thin. There's an ongoing academic debate about whether the rise of Tong criminal activity was inevitable or entirely reactionary. Did these organisations choose crime, or was it simply the only available path for power in a system stacked against them? Some scholars say the Tongs would have remained benevolent if left alone. Others argue that crime follows opportunity, and Chinatown, even then, was ripe for exploitation, from within and without. You pass a storefront selling jade trinkets and paper fans. The man behind the counter nods, but doesn't smile. Beneath the counter there's likely a knife, maybe a gun, or maybe just a ledger with the names of every shopkeeper who's late on their protection dues. Because yes, the Tongs did protection too, not with beatings in the streets, but with whispered warnings. A merchant who didn't pay might find his shop mysteriously flooded overnight, or robbed by someone unknown, or maybe a fire breaks out. Accidents happen, and if he goes to the police don't come here. They don't want to. You enter a tea shop and sit quietly in the corner. It's late. Rain taps softly against the window. The man next to you pours his tea with two hands, a gesture of respect you weren't expecting. He's old. His fingers are stained with ink and tobacco. He watches the street through the fogged glass like it's a stage. You ask him softly, "Are the Tongs still here?" He doesn't look at you, just replies, "They never left." It's true. Even as the Irish gangs rise and fall, even as the Bowery boys turn into ward captains and the dead rabbits scatter to the wind, the Tongs endure. Not just because they're careful, or clever, or armed, but because they know how to survive a city that hates them without ever making a scene. You finish your tea and step back into the alley. Mott Street is quieter now. A single lantern sways in the breeze, casting flickers of gold against the bricks. Somewhere behind you a door shuts softly. You don't turn around. You've learned by now that the loudest gangsters die first. The ones who whisper, they live forever. The smell of ink and sweat hangs heavy tonight, wrapped in the sharp sting of coal smoke and the distant clatter of horse hooves. You're in an old printing warehouse near Chatham Square. Its windows blacked out, the doors bolted from the inside. But this isn't a publishing house anymore. Not really. It's a front. And behind those doors, under the flicker of a single gas lamp, you're witnessing something new. Something that feels a little too organised for comfort. The gangs aren't just street crews anymore. They're evolving. They're becoming businesses. Gone are the days when a gang was just a bunch of boys with bricks and bravado. Now it's ledgers, schedules, passwords, shakedowns with receipts. The dead rabbits, or what's left of them, don't roam the streets like rabid dogs anymore. They run numbers, they collect dues, they have uniforms, sort of, at least matching jackets. And there they meet in quiet rooms like this one, under candlelight. Talking like bankers, you lean against the wall and watch one of them, their new chief secretary, a former brawler named Finnegan who now uses phrases like asset management and conflict de-escalation. He's got a ledger open in front of him, glasses perched on his nose, and a pistol by his hand. A man walks in late. No one smiles. Finnegan marks something in the book and says flatly, "You're short." The man leaves. No one follows. That's the scariest part. No one needs to. Here's your historical fact. By the 1880s, many of the most notorious street gangs in New York had started to morph into proto-criminal syndicates. They dropped the chaotic violence, at least publicly, and began investing in more subtle, stable crimes. Illegal lotteries, union racketeering, extortion contracts with neighbourhood shops, even legit businesses used to launder their earnings. Gangs weren't dying, they were just getting smart. You walk past a tenement and see a familiar symbol painted on the wall in coal dust. A 5-pointed star inside a rabbit's foot. You know what it means. This building pays a cut to the new rabbit order. The grocer on the first floor pays weekly. The cobbler in the basement gives them free repairs. The families upstairs don't talk to cops, not because they're afraid, because it's just easier this way. The protection money isn't even disguised anymore. It's a line item in the books. And if someone skips payment, no need for a public beating. You just cut off their coal delivery, or arrange a plumbing accident. Maybe you have a friendly officer write them up for some phony violation. See? No blood needed. The plug uglies do something similar. They've got a council now, Yes, an actual council with titles like Treasurer and Neighbourhood Liaison. They rent office space on the second floor of a boarding house and conduct business development meetings every Wednesday. You once saw a rabbit and a plug ugly arguing over market territories with a map spread out on a billiard table. No fists, just finger pointing and gritted teeth. It's practically civilised. Fringe detail. There's strong evidence some gangs began keeping performance records on their own members. Notes about reliability, violence, discretion. Not just to reward loyalty, but to streamline punishment. You don't want to be labelled unpredictable in the new order. That's the kind of adjective that gets you removed. Quietly. And not everyone's happy about the change. You pass a bar where two old gangsters, the kind with knuckles like cobblestones and faces shaped by streetlight brawls, are complaining into their mugs. Used to be you earn respect with a fight, one growls. Now it's who's got the best damn receipts. You ever see a dead rabbit in a waistcoat? Made me wanna spit. They're relics. Men who used to rule the alleyways and now feel themselves being outpaced by spreadsheets. That's the thing. The gangs aren't disappearing. They're consolidating. You hear rumours that some of the Irish factions are planning formal alliances, even drafting charters to divide the city cleanly. No more messy turf wars. A gentleman's agreement, they call it. An actual document. Signed, sealed, witnessed. Imagine that. A constitution for crime. There's a scholar at NYU, decades later, who writes that this era is the birth of the administrative criminal class. Sounds fancy, but all it means is this. The gangs traded their fists for files. They turned their operations into machines. With gears and chains and oil and instructions. And once a machine is running, it doesn't stop easily. You enter a tailor's shop just before closing, and the owner, an older man with tired eyes and needle-pricked fingers, nods when you say you're looking for work. He pulls a curtain aside and shows you the back room. Inside, crates, stamped with foreign shipping labels, silk, coffee, guns, you don't ask. He just says, "Be here Tuesday," and hands you a card with a red wax seal on it. That's how recruitment works now. No more blood oaths behind the butcher's shop, just an appointment. The gangs aren't kids with clubs anymore. They're wearing watches and quoting interest rates. You hear one say, "We'll let Tammany handle the elections, we'll handle the payroll," and you realise they've stopped fighting with the system. They've started becoming it. You step out into the night and it feels calmer. No one's yelling, no brawls in the gutter, no cops chasing anyone, just the soft creak of the wagon wheels and the buzz of gaslights flickering overhead. And yet the city feels more dangerous than ever. Because now the violence isn't loud, it's structured. Clean, predictable, profitable. There's a kind of menace in that. The same way a guillotine is scarier than a sword. One is messy, the other is perfect. And in 5 points, nothing stays messy forever. Eventually, it all gets filed away. You feel it the moment you turn onto Worth Street. It's not loud or sudden, just subtle shifts. New shutters, straighter windows, coat of fresh paint that somehow makes a tenement look even older by contrast. There's scaffolding where there used to be laundry lines. There are signs you don't recognise. For rent, clean, safe, modern. Modern, that word doesn't belong here. Not yet. You've walked these streets long enough to know what this means. The neighbourhoods are changing. 5 points is still 5 points, but it's quieter now. The gangs still exist, but their fights are rarer. The police are less theatrical. Even the filth is being scrubbed, piece by reluctant piece. You see an old man sweeping his stoop with more focus than pride, like he's trying to erase something that keeps coming back. He doesn't look at you, just sweeps. It's the start of something the city will later call progress, but that's just a polite word for erasure. Here's your historical fact. By the 1890s, the infamous slums of 5 points were already being systematically dismantled. The worst tenements were torn down. Streets were rerouted. Reform projects brought new housing, schools, even a few public parks. The press declared the end of the gang era, called it a victory for morality and urban planning. But if you lived here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like being slowly shoved out of your own grave. You pass Mulberry Bend and pause, confused for a moment, because what used to be a tangle of collapsing buildings and garbage heaps is now green. There's a park here now. Small, but real. Trees, grass, a path. You watch a young boy roll a hoop across it and laugh. His mother sits on a bench with a paper cone of roasted chestnuts. This was once murder territory. Now it's a picnic. You sit on a bench nearby, trying to make sense of it. That corner used to be a rabbit safe house. That building's across the way, the one with the flower boxes in the windows, once hosted a brothel where someone was stabbed with a candlestick over a game of dice. You know these stories like your own skin. But now, it's all painted over. That's the danger of reform. Not that it comes too late, not that it's imperfect, but that it forgets. You walk further south, where construction crews are hammering away at a row of new apartments. Not cheap, not exactly, but clean, dry. A woman in a linen skirt and sun hat waves at a workman. They laugh together. It's sweet. It's also completely foreign to this block. And yeah, some of the changes are good. Disease is down, kids have schools and there are fewer bodies in the gutter, and more in pews, schools and shops. That part's real, but so is the silence. The sense that the people who used to define this place have either disappeared or been deliberately moved out. Fringe detail. Oh, there are reports that city planners intentionally routed new sewer systems through known gang tenements first, not to help the poor, but to force them to relocate during construction. Once they were out, the buildings were condemned. Suddenly, reform wasn't about cleaning up poverty, it was about replacing the poor entirely. You walk by a dry goods store that used to be a front for rabbit numbers. The old gang sign above the door has been chiselled away, but if you squint you can still see the shape in the brick. A rabbit's ear, turned to the side, faded, forgotten, but not gone. An older woman sweeps her stoop and sees you staring. "You looking for ghosts?" she asks with a crooked smile. "Maybe you are." There's an academic fight still going on about this era. One side says, reform saved lives. That city beautification, proper housing and sanitation finally ended the gang stranglehold. The other side argues that reform just shifted the crime elsewhere, into the cracks, into new forms. The gangs didn't vanish, they adapted, moved uptown, went into politics, bought suits, changed their names. And let's be honest, you saw this coming. Back when the plug uglies started holding council meetings, when the rabbits started taking protection money in envelopes instead of fists, when cops stopped wearing leather knuckles and started wearing cufflinks. This isn't the end of gang life, it's just stage 2. You pass a tenement with scaffolding climbing its face like ivy. Construction worker is whistling some happy tune. Maybe he doesn't know that 3 people were thrown from the 3rd floor here during a territory dispute back in '72. Maybe he doesn't care. That's the thing about bricks. They hold memories better than people do. You turn onto a block where you once saw a police officer take a bribe in the open. Now there's a bookstore where the old betting parlour used to be. Inside, a clerk with wire-rimmed glasses is unpacking boxes. You step in for a moment just to look. On the shelf near the back, a surprise. A book titled The Gangs of New York, thin and poorly typeset. You flip it open. It's not great, exaggerated, sanitised, full of nonsense. But in between the errors, there are names you remember, places you walked, events you witnessed, and for a brief second you feel something like recognition. It's not much. But it's more than most people from this neighbourhood ever got. You step back out into the light and the wind smells like laundry, not blood. The air is clearer than you remember, and louder in a strange way. Voices of strangers moving into what used to be your home. Children playing in places where bodies once fell. Dogs barking where gunshots once echoed. 5 Points isn't healed. It's buried, and the city built a garden over the grave. You wake to the sound of jackhammers. Not gunshots, not screams, just the rhythmic mechanical thud of steel on concrete. It's almost unsettling in its regularity. You look out from the cracked window of an old tenement, one of the few still standing, and you see it. More demolition, more construction, more men in overalls moving like ants around the corpse of what used to be a city block. Another piece of 5 Points, gone by lunchtime. It's the early 1900s now, and what little remains of the slums is being chewed up by progress. They don't call it 5 Points anymore. The name's fallen out of fashion. You'll see it in old newspapers, whispered in alleyways, scribbled in the margins of police reports. But on the city records, it's just Lower Manhattan, another zip code, another real estate opportunity. And the gangs? Well, they've evolved, mutated or vanished. The old bloodlines are fading, but the power they cuffed into the brick still lingers, passed down in shadows. The dead rabbits, what's left of them, have either scattered or slipped into the folds of early labour unions and city councils. The Bowery boys were never more than a memory by now, polished up for storytelling, defanged for consumption. Their names might show up in a historical society pamphlet or some sanitised stage play, but the real faces, the bloodied, snarling ones, those are gone. Still, if you squint hard enough, you can see their fingerprints. in the politicians who throw parties for their precincts, in the businessmen who offer private security and never list where their money goes, in the policemen who have no official rank but somehow make decisions that shape entire boroughs. Because here's your historical fact. The criminal underground of 5 Points didn't die, it transformed. The loud, messy gangs of the 19th century gave way to a new breed of organised crime. Smoother, richer, and terrifying in a way bricks and broken teeth never could be. The Irish gangs gave way to the Italians, the Jews, and later, the syndicates that would shape American crime for the next 100 years. And yes, some of those crime families trace their roots directly back to 5 Points. Fringe fact, there's a persistent urban legend that a hidden tunnel beneath Paradise Square, long since paved over, was used not just for escape or smuggling, but for ceremonial initiations of early criminal orders. Some say it's still there, buried beneath the foundations of a modern office building. One man claims he found a staircase down to it during a plumbing job in '62 and ran screaming back up after hearing voices that didn't echo properly, and no one believed him, of course. You walk the new sidewalks now, past storefronts with names that sound expensive, and furniture that's never been touched by fire or fear. A bakery stands where a gambling den once operated. A coffee shop sits on top of what used to be an opium parlour. They serve almond milk now. You order one, just for the irony. Outside, a walking tour passes. The guide wears suspenders and a bowler hat, clearly rented for effect. And this, he says with the flair of a magician, was once the most dangerous corner in New York City. Right where you're standing, a man was murdered in broad daylight over a loaf of bread. The tourists gasp. You just sip your drink. He's not even wrong, it did happen here. And a dozen other times, over smaller things. A coin, a wink, a spilled drink. The streets demanded blood for every slight, and the bricks remember, even if the people don't. You find yourself walking toward what was once the old brewery. It's a federal building now. Steel doors, crisp flags, fluorescent lighting inside. No trace of the labyrinthine nightmare that once held over 1,000 people crammed into filth and shadow. No trace of the endless crimes, the desperation, the small flickering acts of humanity. A guard inside gives you a polite nod. You nod back. If he only knew. You turn onto Pearl Street and see a mural being painted on the side of a building. It's colourful, hopeful, kids holding hands, bright skies, the skyline in the background. But behind the scaffolding you spot a faint, older layer of graffiti underneath. A symbol, faded red paint in the shape of a broken crown. You know that one. That was a gang tag. The Crown Rabbits, a late offshoot trying to keep the name alive. Painted over like everything else. That's the scholarly debate these days. How much of 5 Points should be remembered? Is it a cautionary tale? A dark stain on American history? Or is it something deeper, the cracked foundation on which the modern city is built? Some say it's a story of failure, others of resilience. A few bold voices argue it was necessary. The chaos that forced reform, the rot that demanded rebuilding. But if you've walked these streets, you know the truth is messier. 5 Points wasn't just filth and crime, it was people, loud, broken, laughing, starving, fighting people, doing whatever they had to do to survive a world that gave them nothing. You pass a man playing a violin on a corner, his case open for change. The melody is soft and low, almost haunting. A child dances nearby. Her mother claps along, no gangs in sight, no brawls, no blood, just music. It feels like peace. But if you stand very still, very quiet, you can almost hear the echoes. Faint shouting. Distant footfalls, a window shattering somewhere deep in memory. The city wears new clothes, yes, but underneath? It's still 5 Points. It always will be. The shape has changed, the scars are buried, but the bones are still here. Because no matter how many buildings you tear down, no matter how many names you rename, a place like this doesn't vanish. It waits just below the surface. The day feels almost too clean. The air's sharp, the streets freshly swept, and the tourists are out early, cameras at the ready, following tour guides in old-timey waistcoats who gesture broadly and speak loudly, like the ghosts need to hear them too. You're standing now at what used to be the heart of it all, Paradise Square, though there's nothing paradisiacal about it anymore. It's been paved, landscaped, sanitised into submission. They even put up a plaque, bronze, polished. You step closer to read it. Here stood Paradise Square, once the site of 5 Points, one of New York City's most infamous slums, a place of poverty, violence, and eventual reform. And just like that, 30 brutal years reduced to 3 neat lines. You run your hand over the plaque. It's smooth, cold. Doesn't feel like anything that happened here. Doesn't feel like the blood or the brick dust or the sweat. Doesn't feel like the fires or the funerals or the laughter that rose up anyway. History, when it's cleaned up, becomes a thing you visit, not something you remember. But you do remember. You remember the Bowery boys stomping down the street like they owned the city. You remember the dead rabbits fighting tooth and nail for a corner and a scrap of dignity. You remember the cries of the 5 Points mission preaching salvation in the middle of hell. You remember the fear that came with every echoing bootstep in a dark alleyway, and the courage that came from standing tall anyway. And you remember how the gangs weren't monsters, they were products of a system that didn't care, a city that couldn't keep up, and an America still figuring out how to absorb wave after wave of human desperation. These weren't just criminals, they were immigrants, orphans, labourers, refugees. Some became killers, some became cops, some became both. Here's your final historical fact. By 1910, 5 Points was officially declared cleared. City planners, social reformers, and real estate developers all celebrated. The tenements were raised, the parks installed, the crime statistics rebranded. New names were slapped on old places. The neighbourhood was reborn. But not everyone vanished. Some of the old families, Irish, Italian, Chinese, black, dug in and stayed. They moved into the corners, adapted to the new order, joined union, started businesses. Their kids spoke better English, their grandkids stopped talking about the past. And one day someone found an old photo in a drawer, brick alleys, barefoot children, a gang symbol chalked on the wall, and asked, "What is this?" And the answer, that's where the arguments begin. Fringe detail. There's a theory that 5 Points never really ended, it went underground. That the cultural DNA of the gangs mutated, resurfacing later in other forms. The Mafia, Tammany offshoots, the Black Hand, the early street crews of Harlem and the Bronx. Some even say there's a direct line from the Dead Rabbits to the modern Irish mob, a kind of ancestral thread that stretches through blood, through neighbourhood memory, through whispered family stories nobody tells the kids until they're old enough to know how to keep a secret. You take one last walk down the surrounding blocks. On Baxter Street there's a bodega where the old cobbler's shop used to be. The owner is a Dominican man who plays loud salsa and greets every customer like their family. On Park Street, a Chinatown temple glows with incense and prayer, humming quietly beneath the buzz of traffic. On Worth, there's a community centre with flyers in 3 languages, and a mural painted by neighbourhood kids, of a rabbit in red looking proud. That's the thing about neighbourhoods. They don't die, they change clothes. They change names, but the soul stays. It's in the way people fight for turf, even if it's just the corner stool at a cafe. It's in the way they protect their own. It's in the way every generation tells the next, back in my day. Even if the stories don't match the history books. You sit on a bench across from the courthouse, because yes, the city built a courthouse right on top of the most violent square mile in American history. It's a fitting monument, really. Justice planted like a flag over the bones of the lawless. You watch people come and go. Lawyers in suits, defendants in shackles, families in tears. Some things haven't changed at all. A group of teenagers cuts across the square, laughing, jostling each other. One's got a tattoo on his neck. Another's got brass knuckles on his belt loop. You recognise the posture, the swagger. Not gangsters, maybe, not yet, but something in the blood remembers. A tourist takes a photo of the plaque. He doesn't linger. Most people don't. But you do, because you know what they paved over. You know that beneath every neat brick and manicured hedge lies a story too wild to be believed, too messy to be honoured in a museum, too human to be forgotten. A story of knives and feindbau, of friendship and betrayal, of poverty turned into power and desperation turned into legacy. You breathe it in, the city, the weight of it, the silence where screams used to be, and somewhere just under your feet a ghost grins. Because you didn't just survive 5 Points, you walked it all the way through. And now here you are. The city's quiet tonight, or at least quieter than usual. The hum of traffic still echoes in the distance. A siren sings briefly before disappearing and a plane passes overhead, its lights blinking like some star that lost its way. You sit on a rooftop, one that didn't exist in the days of 5 Points, and you look out over a New York that feels both brand new and ancient, stitched together with steel and memory. It's strange to think how it all began. A patch of swampy land, dirt roads, wooden cabin shacks, a neighbourhood cobbled together by desperation and bad planning. And then came the people. Irish, Italian, black, Chinese, Jewish. Chased here by hunger, war, slavery, debt, and every kind of promise. What they found wasn't safety, it was chaos. And they carved their place into it with fists, bricks, and blood. This wasn't just a history of gangs. It was a history of survival, of how people make homes in places no one else wants, of how violence isn't always born from evil, but from need, of how a gang could be a family, a sentence, or a last resort. You watched it all unfold. The rise of the dead rabbits, the fall of the Bowery boys, the strange alliances, the crooked cops, the reformers who helped, and the ones who only made things worse. You saw the fires, both real and metaphorical, that burned through every block of the old 5 Points. And then you saw what rose from the ashes. Sidewalks, gardens, coffee shops, condos. Gentrification disguised as salvation. But you also saw the things that never quite left. The shadows, the symbols scratched into bricks, the whispered names passed down through generations like heirlooms no one talks about at dinner. The city hides its scars well, but scars never fully fade. So tonight, as the wind cools your face and the last taxi rolls down a far-off avenue, remember this. History isn't a thing you visit, it's a thing you carry. Every alley you walk, every building you pass, someone bled there, laughed there, made a choice they couldn't take back. And in a city like New York, the past isn't buried, it's just wearing a new hat. So sleep easy now that you've made it all the way through. You travelled from the muddy roots of a forgotten slum to the manicured streets of modern Manhattan. You saw the bones beneath the brick. You followed the echo of bootsteps and broken glass. And maybe, just maybe, you understand something more about power, people, and the strange, stubborn way the human spirit keeps kicking, especially when it's down. Now dim the lights, let the silence settle. And know this, you've just walked through the roughest chapter of America's underbelly, and somehow, you're still standing.